It's the same old story. It's been a long day at the job, or maybe it's just starting to feel long, and you feel that urge to stretch your legs and get a little bit of a break. You walk down the street, or maybe you get behind the wheel of your car, and you feel the weight begin to lift. You walk through the doors, and the sound of the place starts to clear the air. You get a table, you order your drink, you listen to the sounds of the bar, and soak in the conversation. Welcome to the TNE Speakeasy with your hosts, Eric, Isaac, and Caleb. Listen in as I discuss the 1958 film, The Hidden Fortress.
Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, those in between and unaffiliated, to another mini-series, I suppose. And this one, we have been waiting for, Caleb and I have been waiting for this one for quite a long time. Caleb, are you excited that we are finally here?
Oh yeah, 3 years. 3 years it's taken us, and we're finally here, and yeah, I'm very glad to eventually get my THX 1138 Blu-ray back.
Just looking away from and imagining that I didn't actually still have it in my room anyway, and I'm looking at it right now. Anyways, so I don't know how we would have done this originally. We probably would have done a commentary, and it would have been filled with dead air and stuff that I wouldn't have known to say, so I would have embarrassed myself. But thankfully, we have 3 people here, so we can keep the conversation going. And here's hoping that, knock on wood, we will not go the length of this film, because it's a long film, but usually I'll admit myself, I tend to just extend these things past their due.
Oh no, that's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, how would it turned out if we'd done it back then? Because I think it was only a few months later when we did our first non-commentary episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would have still been in that mode.
It probably would have been a scene by scene at that point, but who knows? Eric, we are glad that you are here with us tonight. Thank you for deciding to join us with this. When was the first time you watched The Hidden Fortress, and how did somebody recommend it to you, or is it one of those things, cultural osmosis, like everybody talks about it, so you're like, I got to go out and watch it?
So it was approximately 25 years ago.
That makes sense. That explains some things for me.
I'm curious, I have an idea what that might be, but it was approximately 25 years ago, probably on VHS. As to why I sought it out, it was a little mixture of reasons. Yes, it's true, part of it was hearing about its connection to Star Wars, but it definitely wasn't only that. In those days, the late 90s, I was going on a bit of two things were going on with me in the very late 90s as it pertained to movie watching, especially at home, which is I was definitely steering more into Asian cinema, primarily Chinese and Japanese, but also because of a random purchase I had picked up at Suncoast one day, which was like a Samurai Ronin type movie, and I was like so blown away by it that just based on like that one movie, I just started checking out just some samurai stuff in general. So those are probably the main two, like just that, my having my interest focused in that genre combined with hearing about the Star Wars connection and hearing about the director, who I was aware of at the time, but I was just like newly aware of Akira Kurosawa and who he was. So that was another thing.
Yeah, and I'm curious, had you gone back to it over the years, or was it just that one viewing and then again today?
That's basically the best way to explain it, yes.
Yeah, Isaac, I guess I'll skip the line, because I'll say, just in terms of not giving my final thoughts yet, but to explain my statement from earlier. Yeah, because coming into this, Eric, for I guess a couple of years now, has been stressing that, people need to go back and watch this, and when they watch Star Wars: A New Hope, it's not going to be, this is like a clear influence. It's like, yeah, almost theft or a carbon copy to some degree. That they're so close. But I mean, maybe Eric, you'd still argue that having rewatched it, but I think that the resemblance is rather thin. It comes down to a couple character elements, really. But yeah, so knowing that you watched all that time ago, I could see how maybe your memories would shade it different.
This is what I thought you were gonna say.
Yeah.
And it definitely was a bit of a revelation, which I'll explain more to see it again now. But quickly to address that, because I was trying to think, how could my memory be so off? The best I could think at this point is I must have seen another samurai film around the same time as Hidden Fortress. And I think I may have combined memories of the two films together because there was definite scenes I remember in my head that were not in this movie. Like when I watched it now, I don't think I dreamt up those scenes. So that's why that's my theory is that I must be combining another samurai film into it.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, and maybe when we do our Star Wars discussion, I'll look more into the influences and see if I can track down what that might have been.
Dune.
Again, very loose connections there as well. Just little sprinkles of influence.
Pretty intense sprinkles.
I don't think so, but maybe we can get into that some other time. But for me, I'll say, yeah, I came to watch this today because we were doing this discussion, but I would have gotten to it relatively soon because I think it was, wow, it may have been last summer actually that I started my watch through of going through all of his films, Akira Kurosawa. I think at this point I've seen 13 or 14 of them, and I had to unfortunately skip ahead in the line 4 films to get to this. I wasn't quite at this film yet, but oh boy, I've been enjoying this watch through, and I'm very excited to get the chance to talk about him a little bit here with this film. But how about you, Isaac? What's your experience with this film?
Yeah, I completely forgot to mention, like, hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Between Unaffiliated. This is our first Kurosawa film. We, like, we're
Yeah.
over 200 episodes in, and we finally got to him, which is great. It means that, we still have, we haven't even gotten to, like, many of the other big directors. That's the whole point. We're not going to, like, chase trends or anything like that. We're doing our own thing, which is great. And yeah, no, I've been wanting to, we've been talking about doing a Kurosawa retrospective for like since the beginning of this channel, so it's not like we haven't got to him. We'll get to everything. Don't worry. We're gonna do as much as we can as long as we keep breathing and we still have interest, which we still do. So as my first, I guess, Kurosawa film, again, like you probably like through cultural osmosis, you probably don't think there's when they did Empire of Dreams, the documentary pertaining to the original trilogy's makings. They did mention this, obviously. There's a few scenes from that that were put in there, but they mostly just skipped kind of through that. And like what Eric said, whenever we were discussing, I don't remember which episode of Star Wars it was or prequel. But I remember I pointed that out, and Eric's like, "Oh yeah, it's like shot for shot almost." And I kind of figured you were exaggerating, so I had that in my mind when this was the case. But I also had in my mind of, okay, so Kurosawa, he's had how many films has he had to his name, Caleb?
Up to this point, or just in general?
Up to this point, I guess, yeah, up to this point, and then in general.
I think this was his 17th, but let me quickly check my 18th film.
18th. Okay. And what was his overall totals for films?
The ones that are still available that you can get that are theatrical, I believe, was just 30.
30. Wow.
I believe.
Quite a workman. Well, quite a journeyman when it came to that. Now, at the same time, so yeah, this is my first time viewing it. Being lazy, of course, just never getting around to. And always like, I'll watch it later. Like, I have plenty of life left in me. I'm going to regret that on my deathbed. And so, yeah, I was excited to come to this. And I was wondering like I said before, I was wondering if any of this movie is kind of, I'm not going to say Kurosawa poking fun at himself, but at least there's some mythology, there's history with what he was doing with his other films. And so this is like not riding the coattails necessarily, but doing something that he's done before, but he's doing it differently. I wondered that.
Yeah, actually, in a number of ways, that is, yeah, definitely happening here. In some ways, I even had to go back and rewatch it because I was like, wow, this actually feels super close to one of his early films, The Men Who Tread on the Lion's Tail, I believe it was called.
Interesting.
And it had somewhat of a similar plot element where, yeah, this kingdom, or I don't know what you call it back then, fief, I don't know. Either way, it fell apart, and it was this general and these monks, or should I say, like samurais pretending to be monks, trying to ferry this prince off into another place. And so they also had to go through different borders, and there was also like this commoner element that these two I don't know, I guess you call them like the C3PO and R2D2 stand-ins or analogs later. Yeah, this those two kind of characters are something that you see throughout most of Kurosawa's films. Just these kind of lowly commoner types. And not just the samurai ones too. You see them a lot in his contemporary films. Those people are kind of yeah, just lower in the economic scale and yeah, a little bit fucked up. You know, they got their darker elements. That pops up a lot in his films. So being kind of framed around them this time, because usually they're just kind of side characters. But to, you know, we start this movie with them and we end with them. That was kind of an evolution on what he'd been doing, kind of really putting the spotlight rather than just as side bits.
And the overall tone of this film is very much more. Well, there's not that there isn't any drama, but it's kind of a little lighthearted. I found, again, not fully lighthearted, but in the end, not really, whatever, spoilers. In the end, like, both fellow commoners, both of the jokesters themselves, make it to the end, alive. And obviously the princess and the general, they also make it out there alive. So it kind of is, if we're talking like Shakespeare stuff, which Kurosawa was very heavily influenced, this is one of his comedies.
Yeah, and I'll say one of the surprising things about his films is how much he really does throw in unexpected comedy. This one, yeah, it starts with it and it continues all the way through. But so many of his movies, even ones that are really dark, he just finds a way to insert humor in it that feels really natural. So yeah, I always appreciate that element of his films. And for this one, I think right from the start with those two, we get this great kind of almost like a handheld shot, which I thought felt very modern. Felt like it was a little bit ahead of its time, that shot. With these two bickering, I guess, thieves, I thought that there was some funny dialogue just in that little opening there.
Yeah, according to all the critics and writers on this film, everyone labels it as a comedy, which I wouldn't have thought on my own. Even though I get all the humorous elements, of course, I just wouldn't have thought as the movie overall as a comedy. But apparently, that is what is agreed upon by everyone. Because I was thinking, okay, fine, if I'm going to call this a comedy, which is fine, then I would, by that standard, I would say like the entire original trilogy of Star Wars is a comedy. Because it doesn't have as much humor, but I would say close to this. But whatever.
Yeah, you know, that is interesting to label it as just like a straight comedy. I wouldn't necessarily say that either. But but this does feel, you know, I'm sure you guys noticed on Zencaster here, I put my name as the ugly. I couldn't stop drawing comparisons to Leone's some of his westerns, and in particular, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and A Fistful of Dynamite, or a Duck You Sucker, whichever title you want for that one, which is very much in this same tone. There's so much humor throughout, and I think people label that as a comedy western, but I more think of it as a western with comedy, but very very much in this tone.
I hadn't heard that either. But I had time to watch the entire Criterion commentary for this movie as well. And whoever penned that commentary, yeah, it was their assertion that Good and Bad and the Ugly draws more from this film than A New Hope does.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I need to go back and revisit that movie. But I'm still a little bit suspect because at another point in the commentary, whoever wrote it was saying, "Oh, and yeah, there's these connections to Star Wars, but I didn't really bring up much because I don't really see much else there." And so then I was like, "Wait a second, what are you talking about?" Because he only talked about the point of view characters being the droids. I was like, "There's a lot of other parallels than just that." So then that put the whole thing in, as suspect to me, like his overall assertion earlier. So I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe we should just get that out of the way to start, because I don't know if Isaac, if you said it in the beginning that this was this little mini series that we're doing is the Road to Star Wars. It's the we're gonna do this film and then the two other, or was it three other Lucas films? I can't remember.
This roadmap B, the Hidden Fortress, THX 1138B, and American Graffiti. I don't remember if we had a fourth one in there or not,
Okay.
but I guess the fourth one was supposed to be A New Hope. I don't remember.
No Red Tails, Rise of the Guardians.
This is before 1977. We're not doing a George Lucas
Yes.
retrospective. We're doing a Road to Star Wars 1977.
I got you.
Yeah, so due to the Star Wars comparisons, yeah, maybe we should get that out of the way, because I don't think it informs this movie all that much. I can definitely see them. Of course, the C-3PO analogs, we get tons and tons of wipes, and Kurosawa loves his wipes. He's been doing that for many years at this point. There's, of course, Princess Leia stand-in, which I feel like that is, you can really feel the connection there, the DNA put into Princess Leia. I think that's fun. And I guess there's a slight Obi-Wan Vader connection there, just a smidge. I don't know. I feel like those.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Just a smidge, I think.
I think it's a little bit more than a smidge.
We'll take it away. Take it away.
Well, with that element, I just want to say up front though, there's also like a little 9-minute feature with George Lucas where he reacts to Akira Kurosawa on the Criterion,
Oh,
and I thought it was funny when he was talking about this movie in particular because he said, and this was recorded like in like 2001 or something, but he said that his only real element that he drew upon for Star Wars was again the droid peasant dynamic, and from their point of view, yada yada yada. He said, "Yeah, there's the princess," but he said, if anything, that's just a coincidence that he wasn't really taking from Kurosawa there. His reasoning was that Kurosawa or the Hidden Fortress princess is more this. I don't know how he put it, but basically he was saying like more of like this open-minded like leader who had nuance and this and that, whereas his princess was meant to be more just a straight fighter. So that's how he was like, nah, so it's different. Like, it's just a coincidence I had a princess character. And I was like, okay, whatever,
I
George.
don't know about that.
yeah, this guy, I swear he doesn't understand his own work.
Rewriting history, controlling the narrative. Like, at one point, Luke was supposed to be a girl, but they didn't want to have, two girls in a movie. So it's like, what? Jeez, like.
Oh, no. Yeah, let's save this.
Yeah, but if you want to talk more specifically on, like, Obi-Wan Vader, now, the Obi-Wan thing was more apparent to me. The Vader thing, I didn't. It didn't really play much in my mind until I was just like reading more, listening to the commentary. So obviously, General Rokurota, obviously he is like the mentor figure. He's like the protector. But he's like Obi-Wan. But what's interesting or not, he's more like the Clone Wars Obi-Wan, which I know didn't exist, obviously, at the time of A New Hope, than he was the older version of Obi-Wan. But still, definitely, the general played that role, even if he wasn't exactly like Obi-Wan in A New Hope specifically. And then, yeah, the Vader thing I didn't think too much of, as I said, but I mean, now that I've read about it, and it's pretty obvious that the opposing general, is it Tadakoro?
Mm-hmm.
That one?
Yep.
So he's certainly like the Darth Vader like figure in the movie, and that much I picked up on my own watching it now. And then I guess there's the bonus of like the redemption arc, but of course that doesn't come into play fully until you get to the end of the original trilogy. But I think it's really, really fair. And then, those are some of the obvious connections to the original trilogy. And then I just felt the unintentional coincidence, or not coincidence, but reference to Kylo Ren and getting his scar. I could not stop thinking about that. once we saw
Oh, interesting.
the general's injury. So similar.
Yeah, and just to counter slightly with the only reason I would say I saw a connection with Obi-Wan and Vader isn't because the characters felt in any way analogous. It's just more the major duel in the film, of course, was Obi-Wan and Vader in that first film, and is the General and
Oh yeah,
Todakoro.
yeah.
And then yeah, the fact that they were friends and enemies at the same time and having that kind of history together. That's more where I drew the analogies, not necessarily in terms of what they, because I don't really see too much DNA of Obi-Wan in terms of the role he plays here, or Vader, really.
Um, See, it's funny because again, some of it is from the original trilogy, and then some of it is when you think about what he did previously in the Clone Wars era. But even if we don't count the Clone Wars era stuff, it's just it gets kind of divided in like A New Hope, because he still is like the elder protector mentor of the younger person, and he's trying to, you know, oh no, he's not actually. I was gonna say he's trying to save the princess, but that happens like incidentally because he's off on another mission on the Death Star. But he still plays the role of that protector. It's just you can see how it's been edited down and changed in A New Hope, and supposedly like original versions of A New Hope, the script were a lot more similar to A Hidden Fortress and these primary characters. It just got changed and diluted in more iterations of the New Hope script. But
Hmm.
I don't see much difference. Like they make perfect sense to me as analogs. The only big difference is that he's obviously more a general warrior type character in Hidden Fortress than the final version of Obi-Wan in A New Hope.
Yeah, I think the big difference is the kind of spiritual element that's so pervasive in Star Wars. I don't feel like, and I do actually feel it's pervasive in other Kurosawa films, but I don't feel like there's much spiritual component at all to the general character or the relationship with.
Well, it actually happens in reverse in A Hidden Fortress,
Mm,
because in the Hidden Fortress, Princess Yuki is the spiritual one, and for the first half of the movie, General Rokurota is a straightforward, by the book, doesn't believe in the Force in any possible way. Definitely doesn't show that he does in any possible way for the first half. But there's a start of a turn about midway, um, where Rota, who has always done things by orders, strictly the way you do it by the book, he starts to turn about midway and starts experimenting with being like spontaneous and in the moment. And you can
mm,
see when it happens because the princess sees it and you recognize it on her face. And he undergoes a conversion because he is inspired by her. Um, and it all starts, well, no, it starts before, but it starts becoming really obvious by the Fire Festival. Um, and she not only kind of converts Rokurota, she converts Tadakoro as well by
mm.
the end. So she actually fills that spiritual teaching role in this movie.
Yeah, and Isaac, I'm curious what your thoughts about these Star Wars connections with all these different characters.
Yeah, I wonder if Filoni was looking at what Lucas was talking about with Hidden Fortress being an influence on 77. So I wonder if when he was doing CG Wars, I wonder if when writing the character of Obi-Wan, though he's obviously called the negotiator in that series, I do wonder if, yeah, he did, like Eric said, kind of draw upon this general as being the inspiration for that characterization of Obi-Wan in that show.
I would not be surprised in the slightest.
That's potentially possible. Yeah, no. Other than the peasants bickering at each other and being an old married couple, the other general, the rival general, it's a lot more friendly between these two. They have a lot of respect for one another, which I really much do enjoy. And they were both comrades. I remember the general, he tells him when they're captive towards the end before the song, princess sings a song. He's like, even though we are on different sides, I'm paraphrasing, even though we're on different sides, we're still friends. I'm like, interesting. That's very interesting. Like Eric said, it's the I guess Anakin, Obi-Wan, or just Anakin's arc from the original trilogy, but just stretched, like I said, 3 films. Or I guess whatever Kylo Ren did there. So that part is interesting. I'll give Eric that. I didn't think of that, but I did at least like how different that was. But again, as its own thing, I definitely enjoy it. But Princess Yuki herself is nothing like Princess Leia. I think she's a lot more of an active presence in this. And again, she uses her. Not that Princess Leia doesn't use this a lot, but she uses her mind. Even though she's physically incapable, not incapable, but just she's not as strong or as a fighter as everybody else is in this film. She at least still uses her mind. That's definitely one thing I like about her. And there's an assuredness to her. I really like that. But I'm getting ahead of myself and going a little off track of what he said. No, I don't really see anything. I guess the big thing itself is that the Hidden Fortress was the biggest adaptation change. The Hidden Fortress was on the side of evil in 1977, and it was a moving fortress. The eponymous Hidden Fortress in this film is only spent in we spend in I don't know 1/3 of the film, and not even that. It's maybe 1.5% of the film or whatnot of the film, or out of 3, excuse me, at the Hidden Fortress, and then gets burnt down. So I do wonder what this was called. I didn't look this up, so pardon me if it's obvious, but I don't know what this was called in Japan, like what the actual translation is of the title. Because if it was just called the Hidden Fortress over here in North America, I kind of feel a little bit well, not
I got it for you.
But okay, what is it?
The Japanese literal translation is the 3 villains of the Hidden Fortress.
The three
villains. That's
okay.
That's interesting.
Put a pin in that for now. Maybe we'll debate that shortly. But let's finish off, what we're talking about with the Star Wars comparison. Because
I got some more.
General of the Star Wars comparisons.
Yeah.
By all means, please take the mic.
Some I just thought of in the moment. Some I already had chambered. But of course, the princess loses her land or her kingdom, kind of like losing Alderaan. Mm-hmm. The older general, the one who has the very recognizable face for Akira Kurosawa movies.
Oh yes, Takashi Shimura.
Yes, that who's in the Hidden Fortress or in the mountain or something.
Yeah.
He's definitely very much like a Yoda character. No, not. I don't mean like he's the character of Yoda. I mean he fills the same role. I'm not saying characteristics of Yoda.
Seems like a stretch, but go ahead.
How is that a stretch though?
What when you see like a Yoda, I don't see it at all.
Because obviously Yoda is the elder Jedi. Obviously this guy represents the old wise guard. I mean that's the same role. Again, I'm not saying the characteristics overlap. I'm saying the role that they play.
It just feels a bit like reaching to find connections, but go ahead.
The way she loses her elders, the princess, we don't see it on screen except from a distance, but that's like Luke losing his uncle and aunt, and them, being burned to death, or whatever happens to them in A New Hope. No, I think those are the ones I had right now in the moment.
Yeah, and maybe I struggle with that a little bit just because both those tropes are super duper common throughout these kind of samurai films.
Oh, and that's fine though, because certainly Lucas could have been at times drawing specifically from a Hidden Fortress, and then obviously at other times just drawing from the genre in general.
Yeah.
So I mean that makes sense. But still, if they happen in both, and he's already drawing from one, I still think it counts, even if it's repeated in other films, like the trope or whatever.
Yeah, and by the way, Isaac, did you recognize that old man in the Hidden Fortress?
Yes, I believe it was one of the scientists from Godzilla. Correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely, and apparently, I think it must have been Kurosawa's biggest collaborator. He shows up in almost all of his films. Even that the Men Who Tread on Horses from at least 10 years before this, he was still a leading man in Kurosawa films.
A good actor. First of all, everybody in this film I think is a good actor, at least to me. But like, that
Yeah.
guy, yeah, he's such a presence and delivers his lines with recognizability and memorability. Excuse me. As even if it is like the caricatures, like or the cliched wise old man, it's like I don't care. Like he fulfills his role and duty, and I like him.
Yeah, and he's the lead in Seven Samurai, and that's one of his career standouts. He's just so good in that movie. But
Oh, I got some others I forgot. Just like especially a large part of the landscape in general that looks Tatooine like because
that's fair.
it was just on the screen this one scene where the two peasants look over like a rock face or cliff when they look down to the hidden fortress for the first time, and it just reminded me of Luke looking over as he was like trying to scan the sand people with his
Hmm.
monocular. Um, so it just looked super similar. And then, of course, just seeing like the random troops, uh, uh, clan troops running around, very stormtrooper like, just trying to dodge them. And I know that's a very broad trope. That's not just Star Wars or
Yeah.
Samurai, but just trying to dodge them, like dodge the troops and the checkpoints in Mos Eisley. Yeah, and you may say these are stretching, but when there's so much, because I feel like these are atmospheric type references, but when you have such a culmination of them, and again, I know it applies to the genre, samurai genre,
Yeah.
it's still it's still a through line, even if it isn't like a direct copy and paste. Oh, and something I wanted to say about the wipes. I've always loved the wipes. I always thought they were super cool, and I always loved that they brought them back in the more modern eras of Star Trek. But one thing I find funny, because you guys know I watch a lot of first time reactors, and when it's a Gen Z first time reactor and they're watching the original trilogy, they practically all of them notice the wipes, especially because they're YouTube editors themselves. So they're highly cognizant of the wipes, and they all think they are incredibly unintentionally funny and very old fashioned. Like they always notice that and laugh and think it's hilarious, um, which I find weird, but I get it.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't see them almost at all anymore. So I can understand why they'd be like, "Wow, really? They're doing that?" That's what I used
Well,
to do.
I know you don't see them, but they're cool. Or I always thought they were cool.
I agree, and I think Kurosawa does some really, really interesting wipes. Maybe not so much in this film, but some of his other ones that really just kind of jar you for a moment.
And when it comes to older movies, I was just thinking today, watching the wipes, that it's much preferable to the standard old movie fade out, fade in. Because whenever you're watching like an old movie and it fades out between scenes, the camera stock gets all weird and like
Yeah,
double processed. So much cleaner just to do a wipe. Um, I'm surprised that wasn't more of a standard practice in classic film in general.
I think the reason that it's not more prevalent is it in some ways breaks the reality of the movie a smidge.
Oh, okay, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, it makes you way more cognizant of the editing than maybe other filmmakers might want you to be.
That's true. I guess in my mind, I'm just thinking of the cleanness, like aesthetic versus, yeah, you're right, as far as story flow.
Oh, but maybe moving away from. Oh, actually, I guess there's one more thing I wanted to mention for the Star Wars connection. The minute I saw Toshiro Mifune on the screen, Mifune, who plays the general, I assumed that he was going to be like a Han Solo type character. Not just because of his connection with the gold and the, yeah, kind of scheming peasants, but just his personality that he brings to a lot of his roles. I could see a mild connection with Harrison Ford. Maybe more of a like an Al Pacino type in terms of the breadth of his career, but someone who can play a more mischievous, kind of good-hearted hero. I could see some of that in there, so I was a little bit surprised because I was expecting more Star Wars connections early on. They didn't take on that role.
Yes, in my messed up memory, I had remembered the general as being much more like a Han Solo character, which obviously is not the way it turned out.
I don't know if this is true or not. Like it's urban legend by this point, but somewhere there was probably a decision that George Lucas wanted to have Toshiro Mifune as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Apparently, that was
Oh
the
wow!
idea. Yeah, that's the rumor. That's one of the pieces of trivia back in the day, or somewhere that I read. It could have happened, and that would have been kind of cool. Also, you could see the garb that the general wears was adapted to look like and brought in to look like what Obi-Wan wears on Tatooine.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna say,
Hmm.
even though it's so obvious, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be brought up how much the costumes resemble Tatooine. Because remember, at the time of New Hope, that wasn't a Jedi costume. That was a
Yeah.
Tatooine costume.
Again, Luke wears the Jedi uniform at the end of Episode 6. Which, by the way, I gotta correct myself. Anakin's garb. I don't know if I said this in Episode 2 or 3, but the garb that Anakin wears, even though I love what Sean said, where it feels like it's something out of a spaghetti western or something like whatever Clint Eastwood's name is in the Fistful of Dollars trilogy, but like Blondie, which is true. I just realized that, yeah, I guess Anakin's uniform is actually a lot more closer to what Luke wears at the end of Jedi. I just realized that now.
Yeah, and of course Ray has a variation. Um, and yeah, and I first realized this as being super obvious because I saw Seventh Samurai before I saw this movie ever, and so when I saw Seventh Samurai, I was like, oh, there you go, all the Jedi costumes.
And I guess overall, there's a princess who the general wants to get her back to her basically homeland,
Yeah,
and carry all the gold, which is the MacGuffin, I suppose. So that way, because gold means influence in these times, so that way they can reestablish her kingdom or her influence as a political figure, which they do in the end, which is great. So it's kind of a not as a it's a climactic ending, I suppose, but not as explosive as 77 was.
yes, and even though it was small scale, I still felt like the ceremony at the end was the small scale version of the ceremony at the end of New Hope. And even though this is a post trilogy reference, you can't skip over the Princess Double as well, like
Hmm.
Amidala is.
Like I said, back in episode 1, even though again that was like briefly, and again, yeah, I don't see much of episode 1 in this. I was thinking that as well. I was like, hey, do I see anything in episode 1 other than like these two being Jar Jar Binks? Which I presume that these two peasants are a lot funnier than Binks himself.
Yeah. Oh, and in episode 1, the princess does the same thing as Amidala, which is go undercover as a peasant.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
That is correct. Except they try to pull a bait and switch with us, the audience.
Right, right, right.
When we see Boss Nass. But anyway,
Yeah, but maybe pulling it back from some of the Star Wars stuff. I feel like we spent quite a bit of time on
yeah,
that.
no, this is thus ends the Star Wars obvious oblivious Star Wars section. Let's analyze the movie from the Novice Elitists perspective. Go.
Yeah, and just I already mentioned that I think and this comes up a lot when I watch Kurosawa's films, especially in comparison to Hollywood films around the same period. But the way he makes films, that kind of handheld opening at the start, I was like, wow, that for a movie from this time, I think that feels very modern. And then just in terms of the language throughout the movie, there's so many more uh, harsh words being thrown around than I think that you'd find. So I found that surprising, and a little bit of the violence with that first bandit that we see being killed with the blood all over him. I was like, oh wow, that even for Kurosawa, what I've seen so far, that's a little bit more gory than he usually goes to at this point in his career.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That first samurai who gets killed in the opening, um, my gosh, he looked like a 80s 90s era Klingon to me, like 100%.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I had a lot of these moments watching this movie, which is, I've always seen elements of Klingons and Romulans,
Yeah.
like in Japanese historical type movies or period type movies, and it was just as obvious as anything to me watching this now today. But some things I wouldn't have known if not for the commentary, which I really appreciated along the lines of what you were just saying, is that Kurosawa, at least especially in this era, was definitely a rule breaker when it came to how you're supposed to direct and edit films,
Hmm.
especially as it pertained to the the Toho scope or Cinescope or widescreen model, because
Oh
this
yeah.
was Akira Kurosawa's very first widescreen film,
Yeah.
and again, a lot of this stuff I wouldn't have known if it wasn't for the commentary. But apparently in American Hollywood at the time, because in American Hollywood, like around the early 50s, almost all the major film productions converted to the cinescope style aspect ratio. And one of the rules, quote unquote, was you should never do quick editing in the widescreen format because it'll like confuse the audience visually. Um, but one thing Akira Kurosawa does in this movie is completely abandons that rule, and it just works. Like it was just like a rule based on nothing, like just kind of like what people thought, I guess, as conventional wisdom. And another rule he broke is they said you should not do like long focal length lens shots in widescreen as well.
Hmm.
But that's another thing he did heavily in this movie.
Yeah, and one of the things I always like about Asian films, not just Japanese, but Indian and Chinese films as well, is just the immense amount of extras that you see in the movies. Like there's so many of them, especially during that early kind of slave driving scene. And yeah, the really pulled back shots of that I thought was some really good photography.
Yeah, heavy extras in Asian films. It reminds me of when you see some of those like epics of the silent era in Hollywood.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, who are all these people running around in the desert right now? Like you especially see it in the movie Babylon.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I'd say with these two peasants, if or commoners, whatever they are, thieves. I think they do a good job humanizing them early on because these guys are, I mean, they're a couple of scumbags. But seeing them in that little slave drive, how they kind of incidentally fall into it and then incidentally fall out of it. I think just seeing the toughness of their lives, it kind of makes sense why they're such little bastards. But
They remind, because see, the way they're written by the design, I found the actors incredibly annoying frequently during the movie. They remind me of like some of the hobbits in the Fellowship, but if two of them were just the worst, like most despicable hobbits, um, that's very much they remind me, because like that scene, those scenes when they're captured and marching, have me thinking about like Frodo and Sam in Return of the King when they're hiding amongst the orcs.
I could see it. I could see it. Yeah, and yeah, at times they are quite annoying. Other times they're funny. These two actors are again Kurosawa regulars, and this is quite different positions for both of them. So I kind of like just seeing them in this spot. It's quite unusual for them. But yeah, no, they do become a bit much. Not quite Jar Jar Binks levels, but
Ooh,
yeah, at
close.
times I was like, I could use less of these guys.
And because I kept waiting for them to have a more of a character turn, like see the light, and every time you think that's what's happening, like within 3 minutes, they're like back to being idiots.
Yeah, and Kurosawa does like to paint the. He always likes to have characters that are more complicated. It's like, oh, you would think, oh, these poor peasants, commoners, that they'd be immediately sympathetic, and then maybe partway through the movie you discover something that's like, oh no, they're pretty fucked up. But in this one, it's the constant jump between just being fucked up, and you kind of like them because they make you laugh at times, but otherwise they're, especially when it comes to their relationship with the princess. I mean, they're a couple of real creeps. But in those scenes, I feel like maybe in a modern sense don't play nearly as
Yeah, okay, yeah, but I hate to look at it though in a modern sense.
but we're looking at it from
No, I
2022.
know, but I no, but I hate to do that even with older movies, because I like to judge. Oh, this is a complicated statement. I can't unpack it all right now, but I still try to take a movie, whatever era it comes from, as what it is. While at the same time, yes, I do take into consideration, cultural mores of the day. But what I meant was, especially when it comes to something, well, it could be modern as well, but especially something that is a period like peace. Like, does it make sense in the universe for who she is and who they are and the situation they're in? It a million percent makes sense in that context, which is why I am not fond of some quote unquote modern interpretation that's like, oh, I don't like this, it's creepy, or this is super Weinsteinian. Um, like, yeah, that may be true, but it just makes sense in the
No, no,
universe.
I don't think in the universe you're supposed to be like, oh, look at them, they're so innocent and fun. I mean,
Oh
maybe,
no 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 no! I'm not saying look at them as innocent.
have you ever seen Rashomon?
No no yes
I think
yes
first I was fully aware of the social mores even then.
yes yes. I'm not saying look at them as noble or
Yeah, that's what that was kind of weird. I didn't know what you were trying to say
no
there.
no no no. What I'm saying is because people balk when when just simply the inclusion of that type of content is in a movie. Um, like not that we're supposed to be sympathetic for them, just the fact that oh, why do they even have to have those thoughts? That's the modern reaction I'm like opposed to, which I see a lot with a lot of movies.
Well, there's no one saying that in this podcast, though, so it's not really relevant to bring it up. Is
Well, that's why I thought you were bringing it up when you said it.
oh no, if you hadn't cut me off at the start, I would have shown what I was meaning. Uh, I was saying that the stuff that hasn't aged well is stuff that I think was meant to be funny, but in the terms of current standards, does not play as funny. For instance, I was thinking of the scene with the straws, where they're drawing straws. I think that was meant to be more of a humorous scene, like look at these two fucks, these low lifes. Any chance they get, they're gonna go after, and they're bickering about it. And I think it was meant to play as a fun scene, but yeah, the humor just does not play funny in 2023. It just feels more skeevy. So that's what I was meaning by aging badly.
I didn't look at it as humorous in that way. If there was any humor in that scene for me, it was more dark humor in the sense of yeah, obviously this is who they are, you know, because they always revert to their ridiculous backwards ways, the characters.
Yeah, and the funny part comes in when the woman that they bought shows up and starts throwing fruit at them and then a rock. That's when it's funny when they're just cowering in the corner like the little worms that they are. But I thought with the straw bit, it was supposed to have some humor as well.
Yeah, but and speaking of her for a second, the I'm just gonna call her the handmaiden, even though that's not exactly what she is. Um, I don't know why I wasn't sure which way she was going to go as a character after she was rescued,
Hmm.
especially when there was the scene where she was picking up supplies or something in the village, and then she heard the people talking about the ransom. Like I almost thought she was completely gonna turn on her on her rescuers, and I thought her character was going to go after the reward or like throw them under the bus.
Isaac, haven't heard from you for a while. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll get to I'll address the previous scene in a second. But yeah, as for addressing what Eric's saying now, there was never any doubt in my mind she was gonna betray her princess. There was no because like she freed them, she was freed by them, so I felt that there was like loyalty till the end. She needed to
Hmm.
go back and quickly warn them of this awareness that the public had, that the authorities were onto them. So I really did enjoy her. I wish there was a little bit more of her, but for what she
Yeah.
served as basically a one of the old peoples, basically a former citizen of the nation. Um, I did like that she joined it, even though she had a very like very minor role. It's I guess still there to just be either like an extra hand or to ground some of the other people. I have no idea. There's probably been many papers, university papers on her character and what she means to the story and how it relates to Japan back in the day as well, or modern times. So I didn't. Yeah, no, there's never a doubt in my mind that she was going to betray the
Wow.
princess. And as for the two scumbags or the two peasants or two point of view characters, well, not always point of view. I actually like, well, okay, so obviously, yeah, my millennial brain is like, this is they're like, for them being I mean, corn dogs or whatnot, hound chasers and all that stuff of just, wanting to, they see they look at the princess in a leering setting as she sleeps. The camera literally like, poses, like shoots at her, like she sleeps so innocently and whatnot. So obviously, and I'm just like, I don't know if I like that, but my other brain is like, I like the fact that these are two morally ambiguous characters, and throughout the entire film, that is the point. And I know that may be a turnoff for a lot of people, where they're just like, you can't do that. Like we need to know, we need to like know where our characters stand, if they're black and white, if they're on the good side or the evil side. I like the fact there's so much gray in this world, and that, like, Kurosawa is playing with the idea of being, at least he made it, he did it right. There's probably been many other like characters like this where it's just like you don't know what side they're going to be on, and this, they're on their own side, they're just trying to survive, and
Yeah.
pleasures of the flesh, of course, but like, yeah, they're very, ambiguous. Aligned, their alignment is ambiguous, but I kind of like that. They're just out for themselves.
I if they were gray as characters, as because I wouldn't call them ambiguous, in that sense. If they're gray though, they're dark, dark, dark gray. Like I think they're essentially bad almost the whole movie, until it turns out to be perhaps a redemption arc by the end. But I don't think they have much going for them on the positive good side. The only time they do good things is when it aligns with their bad intentions.
Yeah, and I think looking at it in the context of like the caste systems, I mean these people are at the bottom of the rung in terms of their caste. They're like nothing. So the fact that they have to scrape by and do whatever it takes to keep going, I mean, you could see why that kind of lifestyle would create them like this. That's what makes them a little bit more gray for me. Is that
Well, you could see that, but there are countless examples of people at the bottom of everything in real life and in fiction where they're not morally bad. Of course, there are ones that are morally bad, but there's plenty of examples of those types of characters not being morally bad, because even when they do something selfish in other works, they're still not as bad as these guys.
yeah, and that's why they play them for comic relief. They're that extreme, taken to so extreme that even the person they call their best friend, give them the right opportunity and they'll happily just screw them over. Like these guys, they are just the scum of the earth, and that's what's meant to be fun about their dynamics. And
Yeah, no, yeah, I get that.
that's what I was mentioning earlier. Occasionally they go a little bit to the point where it's not fun, and then other times they're just distracting because they're a minor Jar Jar Binks of like, okay, I'm just trying to enjoy the scene. I don't need you two mugging in the corner, calling attention to yourselves all the time. Save the funny bits for the really funny parts, and not just throwing everything at the wall like they occasionally do. Only a couple times throughout the movie. So I think that they were distracting, but every now and again it shows up.
Oh, and I just want to say the handmaiden person, I had no faith in her character. I was highly skeptical until the stone over her head scene. Prior to that, I definitely did not have the faith Isaac had.
Yeah, and Kurosawa occasionally did a few like looks from her where it looked like, oh no, maybe she's more mysterious. But I'm on the Isaac side. I just never took it as that's what they were introducing that character for. It wouldn't have seemed to fit for me if they made that choice. But but I did like that her inclusion in there. It helped, of course, in terms of the plot for their since the what was the name of the, was it Yamana or Yamana?
Yes, Yamana.
Yeah, since they knew how many that there were, having her there helped for the plot reasons.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it was a good scene for the princess early on when she was so adamant that they buy her back since she was one of their citizens. And boy, that bar scene, those fuckers in there. I mean, those are some creepy dudes too. And really shows the roughness of this world and why people like these two peasants will be shaped the way they are. Like this is just not a world built for people on the lower bottom of the pole.
They were able to accomplish that without gratuitous violence or graphic images. We
Yeah,
didn't just all of a sudden see a woman declothed or anything like that, or abused, other than, like, I guess being verbally abused, which is still a thing, of course. But we didn't see any actions performed against her that would violate her being. So it's like, implied, of course. Excuse me, I gotta be
yeah,
careful how I say
heavily
that. This is
implied.
like heavily implied, but there was at least, like, Kurosawa has some taste. He would treat that stuff with the utmost care, and if he would show it, he would do it in a significantly, like, toned approach.
Yeah, and just since you're mentioning this, I was trying not to bring this up, but just because I was recently editing some of the Kubrick series still. There was one, I believe it was for Spartacus, me and Eric were talking, and he had a point that I massively disagreed with. I didn't really say much at the time, but I think I made a couple comments about foreign cinema. But he was talking about how the code, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing because it encouraged people to be more creative and created some art that, oh, if the code wasn't there, it would just be blatant and they would just be saying it, that kind of thing. But I was thinking about a movie like this, which came out during that same period when so many movies are being crippled by the code, and you see what Kurosawa was able to do. I didn't want to bring it up, but Isaac saying that kind of inspired me to say.
Well, no, I don't see any reason not to bring it up, and I definitely strongly still agree with myself on my past point. I wasn't sure what you were going to say, um, but it's funny though you bring that up though, because listening to the recent conversation, even before you brought up Kubrick, I was when you talked about, or when Isaac was talking about how it's implied enough without being explicit, my mind instantly went to Lolita, Kubrick's version specifically. So I was already thinking about it before you even brought it up, Caleb. And yeah, and I was gonna say too that yeah, I don't imagine you definitely need to go any further in this particular film because again, from my understanding from the commentary, this was already considered quite racy as it was, um,
Hmm.
because it was considered much more not well adult, but not that term, uh,
Mature.
mature. It's something in that in that range. It was already considered as pushing the boundaries and much more extreme than was normal up to this point in the genre.
Yeah.
So it was already like heavily pushing boundaries, um, and yeah, with the violence and the blood, which of course doesn't come off the same in black and white, but still.
Yeah, and I don't know about in particular for this film, but I know with Seven Samurai, Kurosawa got a lot of criticism and people just being frustrated with him not playing with the conventions properly in terms of how things are meant to go. Like the peasants that we see in that, we see tons and tons of victimization for them. And then every now and again, we'd see this side to them that was really dark. And a lot of people hated that because they're like, hey, we want to support the people at the bottom of the pole. We don't want to see them being villains in their own way. And so I was taking some of that knowledge to these two, that these are people that the Japanese audience at that time would be more willing to be like, hey, we want to support the people at the bottom of that wrong caste system. And they're just the complete scumbags of the world here. So I was wondering if that would have been challenging for the audience members.
Yeah, probably. And I like that you brought this up because this was something I was thinking about a lot, reflecting on the commentary because this stuff was new to me. Which is because the commentary talked about how an ongoing theme in Akira Kurosawa movies about a character who is trying to deal with like their differences in what society expects or societal norms,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to find their place in that kind of milieu. Um, and so thinking about that combined with what I already brought up about how he goes against conventional directorial um, uh, rules or norms at the time. So he's obviously displaying like these maverick-like characteristics. If you ever want me to get into a work of fiction or like a biography of someone or something like that, that type of dynamic always piques my interest. So I'm all into that. I because it's just one of those things I feel like I can relate to so much. Is going against the grain or going against like rigid rules. Just in general in life, I'm so about subverting or finding other ways outside of the rules.
Yeah, and that's partially why I highlighted the code. I mean, this is a film that would not have survived the code. There'd be so many snips all over the place.
Well, yeah, because
And that's the only reason why I bring it up is, limiting art and what they're
no,
allowed to do in places where it wasn't in effect.
there's no question the code limits art. There's no question like a lot of movies that came out during the time would have to be, you know, edited, modified against the maker's will to fit the code. There's no question about that. Like if someone's trying to make their own authentic vision of something, there's no question that the code hampers that. Uh, when I was saying what I was saying, I feel like it's a separate topic. which is directors or producers trying to subvert the code, that to me is like a unique art in of itself. It's like a separate, it's almost like a separate genre to me, because one is people trying to do their authentic thing without being hampered by rules. The other is someone trying to play in the rules but find loopholes. And see, that is exciting to me, is finding loopholes in established rules.
Okay, see, that's where I kept getting confused in the Spartacus discussion. I was like, is he saying that he just flat out likes the code because it forced filmmakers to?
No, it's like an unintentional benefit of having the code. And again, people would never have tried to do that if the code didn't exist. Like, why would you try to subvert something that doesn't exist? So it created this subgenre of intrigue to me, to see how different directors, try to play with those boundaries.
Yeah, and I'll say just one more thing on that Spartacus discussion. This is a stupid point, but the whole time I kept being like, oh, I'm pissed off that this movie was so ruined by the code. I think it's good for what it is, but the filmmakers all ended up hating it because they felt like it took out everything that made it interesting and new, and it made it more traditional. And then at the end, you were like, for our final thoughts, you're kind of like, I'm not really that interested. I think it's kind of a weaker film. It feels too traditional. And I didn't think about it until I was editing it. I was like, oh, maybe he would have liked it too if it hadn't been for the code. So
Yeah, well, that's two separate things, because I like Kubrick subverting the code, but it's more in his other films, not Spartacus. And I also agree with my old sentiment on that, because to me, it's not the code per se that hampers Spartacus. It's the Hollywood model and the Hollywood suit types getting involved. That to me is what hampers Spartacus more than the code per se.
yeah, it was the code. If you read Kurt Douglas's book, he goes into extreme detail about that. But anyway, that's not this film. I apologize for bringing that up.
No, it's fine.
Going off into different tangents. But anyway, let's get back to the film. I wanted to highlight, prior to me starting the Sakura Kurosawa retrospective, I wasn't too familiar with Toshiro Mifune. I'd only ever seen The Sword of Doom that he was in, which is a really great film. I'd highly recommend that. But having seen so many of these films now, I'm shocked I don't hear about this guy more. He seems like he's a major actor that, yeah, is on like the level of an Al Pacino or someone like that in his day, for Al Pacino at least. Like, he had so much range, he could do so many crazy chaotic roles, and then, yeah, just amazing presence on the screen. He's really something.
Yeah, I don't know that much about his history as an actor or whatever, but even just based upon this one film, he was giving off all of that. That this is a major leading man, like the equivalent of whoever, like famous American Hollywood actor. He everything about him gave that off. Like, this guy is an acting force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of confidence in this. Again, I really wonder how he would have played Obi-Wan had he played had he been cast as Obi-Wan. Excuse me, for 77. But yeah, he's and very different, obviously, than Obi-Wan. Excuse me. I'm not trying to go back to those similarities, but like, no, very very confident, and he's I like what Eric said about how. Earlier with like how he's kind of straight to the point, or he's like plays by the book, and then it's Princess who inspires him to think outside the box. I didn't. I never read that. I mean, that's obviously, again, this is my first viewing, so I have no idea. That was never my view. I just assumed he was also just trying to, like, he was very quick thinking and he had a mind himself, so he had to like either think on his feet, or at the end of the day, he was trying to get to cross the border, and he didn't get across the border by any means necessary, because then he would have sacrificed these two dummies. But no, he's again, I really like him. He's a very like moral authority figure that we could trust.
Yeah, I also wasn't quite sure what Eric meant about, yeah, him, about her changing it, because I thought right from the start with deciding to align with these two was outside of the box thinking, because I get the sense that he's a samurai, and he does treat these guys as lower, the servant class still, but he's also at the same time like essentially acting like he's making a deal with them and that they're somewhat equal partners, or at least that's what they think.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think he was. I mean, I think he meant that deal, like, like sincerely. No, because okay,
Oh,
so
really?
yes, I do. But you see, at the start of the film, I mean, there's no question he's already like a master strategist. So he already does have quick wits and all that type of thing going on. And it's in his original mindset at the beginning of the movie, he's probably going to kill the peasants um, up until the point that until he learns about their plan, which as a statistician, he obviously sees the value in that, and then he also abides by like the code of honor of the world of the time, and so that's why I think that once he decides to make a pact with these guys, I think he will honor it on his end, certainly because of the rules of honor. Um, but again, even though he takes on their idea, it's because he sees the strategy and wisdom in it, not necessarily because he's changing his ways, even though it is an example of out of the box thinking, which he wouldn't have come up on his own if not for them, because he is so
Hmm.
straight line. And when the turn, I think the first time we see the turn, um, is because also remember he doesn't give a shit about the peasant girl because he can only see how it can hurt them at that point
Yeah.
in the movie. It's just the princess's will that he decides to go along with it. But the first time you see the turn is obviously um, when I think it's when they cross the border. Finally, they go over the bridge, and they get stopped, and then he puts on this whole ruse about I found some gold. There should be a reward. Give me a reward. And that's when you see the princess's reaction. And then his other major turn that goes against tradition was when he had the duel with the other general, the frenemy general. And by all rules of honor, he should end his life once he wins the duel. He goes completely against like tradition as he normally does when he lets him live and says he'll see him again. Um, that's a major turn for the character as well.
That's fair. That part I did wonder what inspired him to do that, because yeah, that did seem like a major honor mistake.
He was starting to see, yeah, the possibilities of the world outside of like all the traditions and rituals. I don't mean religious rituals, but
Yeah, like
norms,
cultural.
societal norms. Yes.
See, that's partially why I assumed from the start that he was not going to honor with these peasants, because I was like, yeah, there's no dishonor to be found with not being honorable to peasants. I mean, they're not worth being honorable to in that system. So I assumed that he was just tricking them to be his kind of workhorses, but which I guess he sort of does. I mean, he does just treat them as
Well, yeah, yeah,
the workers and bullies them, pushes them around.
yeah. But yeah, when they deserve it, he doesn't ever do it out of like just malice.
Yeah, yeah, no, he's not. Yeah. Oh god, I'm just seeing some of the early scenes with when they discover the princess, and yeah, she's bending down very suggestively. I was like, oh dear, yeah, that's a lot.
When the peasants are explaining their plan on the sand, now I totally understood the plan. I get it; it makes sense.
Uh-huh.
But I was so confused by the symbols. I mean, because I know all the clans that they represent, the three clans, like the bars, the balls, and the crescent moon.
Hmm.
But I was confused at first. But I guess it makes more sense to me now, um, because for some reason, where the movie started, I thought we were in the bars territory. Um, so when he was showing the crescent and then going to to get to the balls, you go through the bars.
Hmm.
I thought they had misplaced the symbols. Like it didn't make sense to me. But I guess now, oh no, that is or was her kingdom where the movie starts. That
Yeah.
was the Crescent Kingdom that was destroyed. And so they're trying to retreat to like I guess a friendly neighboring kingdom. So okay, so I get. I mean, it resolved itself because I just didn't understand it. But was anyone else confused, or was I the only one who was confused?
Yeah, I wasn't.
Okay.
But I did love that scene.
Neither was I. That was a really well done scene. I assume it wasn't done in the same place, but just because I don't even know if it was the same like actor's hands, but maybe it was. I don't know.
But I love the fact that these two guys, like, it's almost like they can't string the thought out. They can't string their thoughts together without the other one there to help them piece it together. And I like that he was Like the general is just like, wow, these two idiots, they came up with something that sounds reasonable, and he just laughed at them, and it's like, yeah, I'll go with that. That doesn't sound bad. I thought that was fun.
I mean, I like it, but at the same time, I was like, how did the general not think of that on his own?
Probably because he wouldn't think to want to bring the princess right into enemy territory.
Okay, that's fair. You're right.
My point, Eric, was during his when the general was confiding with the princess before they started their journey, and I think he was talking with some of the other members of the clan.
Yeah.
In that cave, they were. I think he was saying like she was asking, can you be trusted? Paraphrasing, can they be trusted? And it's like I will use their greed to basically get them to do what they want for us.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, no, he knows exactly who they are.
Yeah.
They're survivors. They're greedy, and they're workhorses basically because let them be the ones to carry the gold in plain sight. Brilliant, like just completely. The only thing that kind of either like maybe it is a real thing. My question is, how did they get all the gold inside those branches, those sticks? That was my like huge like, but obviously it's it's part of it's a very like minor nitpick. I'm just like,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
how long did that take?
I didn't think about that, but that seems incredibly difficult.
And I do love the way that he knows the two of them so well. There's that scene. It's right before they're going to cross the border, and they discover that the border's been all sealed off. And they're like, "That's it. We're leaving. We're just going to take as much as we can carry, and we're going to go." And he's just sitting there watching them for a while as they're collecting their branches, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, you can go. Then I'll have the rest of it all to myself. That sounds great." And they look over, they're just like, "Oh crap." Even in that sense, they're like, "Okay, we can't give up on this potential gold for us. We'd hate to see him get away with it."
Yeah. No, I love anytime that happens in movies or narratives where there are lines similar to that, like how I can trust this person to be who they're going to be and use that to my utility.
Yeah.
I just kind of like that in general in anything. There's a lot of lines like that, like in the Godfather saga.
Mm.
But what amazes me, and this is a little bit not relating to movies directly, what amazes me though is how in real life I find that humans in general are very poor at reading other people's motivations. Like when people are trying to think what the other person is thinking, I find
Mm.
that average humans are really bad at it, and for some reason, like they think, "Oh, so and so is going to do this," and I always have to be like, "Why do you think they would do that? Like, what in their character makes you think that they're not going to think about this selfish thing and just do what you say they're going to do?" I don't know. I find I've had those conversations in real life all the time, but that's me.
Yeah, I think people spend a lot of time imagining that other people think the same way that they do.
Yes, absolutely true.
I say it depends on who you ask. I think some people
Of course it does, but
are good at reading people. Others are obviously not.
yeah, that's why I say the average person I think is extremely bad at it.
But I'll get to one of my complaints with the movie that is not something that usually comes up in Kurosawa movies. I feel like he's always great at casting, and I usually come away loving all the performances in the movies that he's casting. But I feel like the princess, she's got a great like facial acting range. Like she can give a lot with just a look. But when it comes to her line deliveries, I feel like a lot of them are kind of shrill, and I feel like a lot of them sound the same. Like she's always yelling at this weird pitch that I feel like the audio equipment struggles to keep up with. I don't know what it is about that, but her deliveries always sound kind of crackly and high pitched and bad. I don't know if you guys felt some of that.
I want not exactly the same, but I did want to bring up this topic though. This, yeah, not directly on the princess, but the princess is included in this, which is I just noticed the yelling and shouting quite a lot from a lot of characters, her included. Practically almost all the characters.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I'm no stranger to Japanese language media. Obviously, this is not my first rodeo, so I know that. But what I was wondering about, because it was so prevalent in this movie, I was gonna ask, like, do you think it's because I don't know, I'm not that studied in like the history of Japanese cinema. Do you think it's because just like in earlier talking Hollywood movies, a lot of the way they spoke was kind of like rooted in, stage plays of a prior era. So, a lot of dialogue in American movies is a lot more stagey, like in the first 20 years or so of talking movies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was wondering, do you think there's like an aspect of that in Japanese cinema that perhaps like when things were relegated to the stage, it was all about projecting your voice, to the people in the back, and maybe that over time just became an established style of acting, and it like carried over into film and live action. Because obviously there's plenty of films like after this, and not just samurai movies, where and it's kind of like an American stereotype to think of Japanese as sounding like very stern shouting. Like even if you think about the evil patriarch in Karate Kid Part Two, but he's always like
Hmm.
Miyagi, da, 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 and he sounds like the guy in Samurai Jack. I said before to you guys, I always thought it was the same guy doing the voice acting, but it's not in Samurai Jack. Um, and then of course in anime in general, like that's almost like a
Yeah.
trope as well. So you think it's that? You think it's something else?
Isaac, any ideas?
Maybe this is wrong, but I don't know if there probably is films out there. There's Japanese. Yeah, why not? I feel like this film is theatrical, as in like it's very like theater based, as if Kurosawa was trying to put on a performance on a stage. So I don't know. Maybe I'm reading. There you go. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. But I see what you're meaning, and same with you, Caleb. I see what you're meaning with like how the princess herself yells and screams a lot. Um, I take it as, at least my initial thoughts are, she's very passionate. She's kind of struggling with how to assess the situation, and even how she's going to be able to get back to her land. And there's that moment where there's that whole thing where she was like raised. Her father wanted a boy, but instead she got a girl, and she thinks differently than him. And some of the elders are like, we've never seen her cry, and then we cut to her, having waterfalls for eyes like they were out of a Miyazaki film. Looking at her land's image in the background as a flag. So I took it as she's trying to appear like she's all in order, but in those private moments to herself, she's breaking down.
Well, yeah. To focus more on the princess in particular, I I find her character incredibly amazing, and I find her greater than the sum of her parts as a character, which I was not expecting going into the movie. Just upon like seeing the entire thing, and it is true. Like when she's delivering dialogue, she mostly plays one note. That I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's no question about that. But it works for me. It totally works. And again, when I was seeing her, I was very much thinking of like a very stoic and stern Romulan like character from Star Trek. Um, so somehow grafting that onto it made it all make even more sense to me. That is just so who she is, and with what Isaac was bringing up, um, I don't know that it was necessarily that she was hiding her inner soft self, um, until it broke out at times. I think it was more that because she definitely shares some characteristics with the general, but yeah, in a youthful, more nuanced way. Um, and it is incredibly interesting just to think on that dynamic of her being a girl who was raised as a boy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot to think about. Like I'm weirdly thinking of Mulan now for some reason. Um, but but I think what was happening was, she had always lived the royal life, for better or for worse, and she played her role like excellently as like a masculine princess type.
Mm-hmm.
But what this whole movie was about, amongst other things, was her opening up to her spiritual side. And that's one of the great aspects of this movie is the whole undercover boss aspect, because she
Yeah.
really starts to see things on the ground level for the first time. and she grows to love and appreciate her kingdom and people and nature even more so. Because even though I said she converts the general, which she does, she is converted herself just before he is. And I think that's why she starts having all those like emotional episodes. And I love, because we don't ever see her smile until the scene again with the general deception. Um, and then I love the way she looks. I mean, expression wise, during the fire dance, like she looks like she
Yeah,
is having the greatest time in the world participating in the dance. And I very much noticed it. And I didn't think they were going to call back to that until they did near the end. I just thought it was just, oh, it's just showing her having fun. I didn't realize how important it was going to be to the character development. And I just, I find her incredibly amazing as a character.
yeah. I also love that fire festival scene. And thinking about the kind of class dynamic there, that was probably the first time that she's seen people who aren't maybe in fear of her, or people who like these two peasants that they're traveling with, just scumbags looking to, only looking out for their own interest. It's all these people together, kind of celebrating their culture. Yeah, I thought that was a really beautiful scene there. And I've been meaning to point this out too. I mentioned that earlier film, The Men Who Tread on the Lion's Tail, or maybe it's the Tiger's Tail. Actually, I think it is. The stand-in for her in that movie, this prince, they always refer to him, or at least a couple times in the movie, they refer to him as a woman. He has this kind of beatific look to him. He looks very clean and very kind of feminine in his features. So I thought it was interesting that here we have this woman who was raised as a kind of a prince in her way. I wonder if Kurosawa was kind of playing with those two dynamics in these two movies.
Oh, I mean, I've not seen the movie you speak of. It was mentioned in the commentary, certainly. Um, I would think 1,000,000%. That's just like a hunch, gut feeling on my part.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just saw a major Star Wars reference on the screen that wasn't
Oh, sure.
mentioned, but it's from the sequel trilogy. Um, the damn logo on the back of General Darth Vader's back is almost identical to the New Order logo. Like I don't think that it could be any more the same.
Oh, interesting. I'll go look at that. And that guy, by the way, is he was Kurosawa's first leading man. I forget the name of the actor, but he shows up all over the place. I always really liked that guy, so I was happy to once again see him here. And even though he doesn't have much screen time, I do really like that character and his little redemption at the end. I was so pleased by I was so pleased by that for some reason. I was like, oh, this is so great. I even wrote, and this is stupid in my notes, uh, for his line when he says, "Forgive this traitor," just as he's leaving. I wrote, "Hey, I love it. Todokoro joins the caravan of courage."
Oh wow.
I don't know why I wrote that.
Oh wow. No, I loved him because he came off as very two-dimensional at first, kind of like how the peasants are two-dimensional. Like what you see is what you get. And then when the other general said, we'll meet again, my mind just assumed they were going to meet in an actual duel to the death at a later time. I didn't really see the turn coming until it was, more obvious what was going to happen. So I didn't expect that character turn. Loved it, fantastic. I did not think that character was going to have nuance.
Yeah, no, I definitely really liked that turn. But Isaac, it's been a while since we heard from you again. Any thoughts there on Todokoro or the princess, like we were just talking about?
I do wonder if, because I may have said this before again, but like maybe because of her gender roles, she's also got some inner turmoil or inner struggles where she was raised this one way, but her real nature, like nature versus nurture, there's a lot like going in there, like how they use reverse psychology as well to get her to become mute or do that.
I like that.
But there's no scheme, like she's not over scheming or she's not trying to scheme against her general or anything like that, but she goes along with it just because it does help better the mission. I was trying, one thing I was trying to do was during the ceremony, during the fire ceremony, I was wondering how, I have to look at this, people have already extrapolated on this and written university papers on this, so it doesn't matter, but I was wondering how the lyrics, the song itself that the people are chanting during the fire ceremony. I was wondering how they pertain to the princess herself, and at least in this first viewing, I could not connect those together. But obviously, somebody who's watched this film many, many times and has probably written a paper on this subject could answer my question.
Well, what's funny about it to me is that, not to mention Star Wars again, and it is a bit of a stretch metaphor, but I think it's a, it's not just a leap of a metaphor. I think it is by design. In other words, not just coincidental. Um, because it's explained in the commentary that the lyrics during the song are based upon like Buddhist ideals
Hmm.
and like Buddhist, you know, and I think the Buddhism and the spiritualism in the movie is the analog for the Force in this movie. Not magical powers per se, but a different insight into the universe around you or what makes up the universe. And looking at it through a Star Wars prism, I think that is her awakening to the all living force around her. And that's what's happening when she's reciting those words. But she's not just reciting them, especially later in the movie. She's actually internalizing them, and she's actually opening other people's like non-force believers, like the two generals. Um, she's kind of like opening their eyes to it as well.
In a way, Caleb, maybe this isn't the same, but I got some Nausicaa vibes from her almost. The way she had that stick that was like a crop or whatever, and Nausicaa kind of has
Yeah.
that in the beginning of the film, and the way she's able to I'm not gonna say turn men against her, but almost have an influence on people, and the compassion she has and innocence to her kind of sways people for how just honest and good hearted she is. So I kind of got some vibes from Nausicaa. Obviously, Miyazaki has his influences for how he made that character, but that was who I was thinking more of.
Oh, interesting.
And I had two more thoughts about the character, just listening to recent conversation. Oh, actually, one I already had before, which was, the Criterion cover for this movie, which obviously has her like holding the stick and everything, looking a little crazed. I have long thought that like I didn't like that cover art. Like it almost looked
No.
unintentionally comical to me, like over the top and kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I've thought that for many years. But after I finished watching the movie today, I think it's incredible. I don't necessarily like the the art style itself for the Criterion cover, but now I want a poster of that image. Not the Criterion drawn one, but like a photographic poster or something of her in that pose, because I think she's so much cooler now. I think the image is so much cooler. And the newer thought I just had a little while ago was I was thinking, you know, in other like let's say kung fu type period Chinese movies I've seen and some other Japanese period movies, and probably in modern ones too, not just period ones. Oftentimes, whenever there's a strong female, she just is what she is. Like she's just a badass. Like she's just a
Yeah.
masterful fighter or whatever. Almost, I hate to use this term, but just to paint the picture for other people, like what they call like a Mary Sue or like the Rey character in Star Wars. Like they just come out of the box like ready to go. Um, but I think this is another reason why I am now so in love with this character is because she's so much, even though she plays flat, um, but when you boil down her character, she is so much more nuanced and incredibly more interesting than those stereotypical female heroines in the Asian cinema I've seen.
Yeah. No, that's certainly fair. And Kurosawa, I'll say up to this point, has had a streak of really strong female characters, especially in something like The Idiot, which I watched recently. The women characters in that are, yeah, they push so much of the story, even though they're not the main focus. It's mainly focused on these two men, but the women have such a huge impact. Yeah, it's another movie that I would very much highlight to check out from his work, The Idiot.
Now, this is a side commentary, but it's a conversation I have at times with random people or other people, which is when it. I'm not trying to get political here. There's a point, but when people talk about whether in modern times or historically about the patriarchy and how could women ever have a chance because they were so subjected in their roles, etc., which I understand historically or present times. But whenever I try to bring up, like, yes, I get females don't have usually the physical strength to combat like tyrannical men or whatever. But I always try to bring up they have other abilities. They have other powerful ways of persuasion and affecting other people to their will if they choose. And I tend to get shouted down or dismissed whenever I bring up that type of argument. But at the very least, would you guys? I mean, isn't it self-apparent in history or in film that it's obvious? Just like this character, she obviously has incredible strengths of influence and otherwise that have nothing to do with physicality. And what's even more interesting in her case, while she is strikingly beautiful, that's not her go-to tool either on how she is able to influence others.
Well, I think she has the luck of her genetics to be born in that kind of royal position, preparing her differently.
Oh, okay. I'll give her that.
Unlike the peasant girl that they buy, who was just a victim of the war and sold off to be a sex slave. Really.
No, there's no question about that. But what I'm saying is, even though she does have her class that she's born into, just because she has her class, like say it was a different princess, that doesn't mean a princess could bend the will of generals, or even not bend the will, but sway them or direct them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just saying, because I always try to bring up that femininity and women bring other strengths to the table, and I obviously often get just dismissed and shouted down. I hate that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the majority impact, I feel like those are more the outliers, which is maybe one of the reasons that people don't highlight them as much. But
I mean, she uses her intelligence. That's the one
yes.
thing I don't know if I'd say it's femininity at this point. I will say,
right.
On paper, I don't really see any femininity in her when she's being, I guess, active and contributing to the plot. I don't want to obviously say that, but like she's using her intelligence, so that's not exactly a fem. Like that's
right.
Totally feminine trait. Yeah,
it's like just neutral for any like gender. So
yes,
makes her a strong character.
I think highlighting in recognizing the plight of that peasant girl and wanting to free her, that might not have been the same instinct if it was a prince. That part of it might have been a little bit affected.
Good point.
Yeah, depending on the character, but I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Because we do see royal figures, male or female, that sometimes generally do care for all of their not followers. What do you call it? Their people, their whatever.
Compatriots? No. Oh yeah.
It's
countrymen.
Like, no, it's not underling.
No.
It's subjects.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So sometimes, it depends on the if like it happens to be a prince or a king. It depends on the character because some are very benevolent to their subjects and others obviously could care less. But the fact that she is a striking beauty to the eyes, and she is a young princess. Remember, I think her character is stated to be 16 years old.
Yep.
That even plays even more to her intelligence, and also aids it to in a sense that people won't see it coming.
Yeah.
From someone so fair and so young.
Yeah, and her kind of impetuous nature, it also makes it more justified. But yeah, she hasn't fully grown into the more regal element of royalty. She's still got that rebellious youth.
Oh yeah, and another aspect, because it was stated earlier, like we were talking about how Kurosawa was pushing like accepted norms for like violence, etc., and being edgy. And yeah, something that was brought up in the commentary that one of the many things people, especially Japanese audiences, did not care for in this movie was and this, from what I understand, this movie played very poorly and was not well received at all by the Japanese culture or public or critics. it wasn't until it achieved notoriety amongst Westerners and Americans that Japanese begin to excuse and accept this film. But and one of the reasons was because so this story, I guess, is very based upon no theater, like
Hmm.
with the costumes and everything. Well, in the theater, it's singing and dancing involved as well.
No face.
And so part of the reason why the Japanese public did not care for this movie or Kurosawa's vision was because I guess in no theater, the rules are very strict about how the archetypes are supposed to act in certain situations, how they're supposed to dress, how they're supposed to present themselves. And I guess Kurosawa breaks a lot of those rules in this movie. And one of one with the good general, um, with breaking in tradition in the movie, that was considered a no. But also for a heroine, princess, aristocratic character, you would never show so much skin. So it was quite scandalous. No one had ever seen this type of character in a Japanese movie that showed so much skin. Like they should be more covered. So that was another big deal.
Yeah, that does actually raise the point of, when we first see her, we kind of like see her from behind, just because, just like to
Yeah.
her back. And then we see like, the striking legs and why they, the two peasants leer on her legs and her figure. So it's like, okay, this is good. This makes sense. There's context. And I figured there was context to a lot of this stuff. Like, yeah, he was Kurosawa was being a rule breaker even in his own country, which, hey, I mean, played out for him in the long run. It's now well regarded as one of the greatest films ever.
Yeah, and he did this all over the place, and he I could feel him even at times, even though I don't fully know the social context. Occasionally, I could feel him like he was intentionally antagonizing his critics and what the social norms were. And anything I've read about him, he sounds like he was very much a Kubrick type as well, where he just could not care what those folks thought about him. He had his dedicated crew that all loved him and respected him, but producers, critics, it sounded like he just had a fuck you mentality. And even a couple of years before this, he did this movie called Scandal, and it was just ridiculing and villainizing the press and paparazzi. And I was like, damn, this feels like it's super harsh the way it portrays them in it.
It's an opinion piece.
And I can only imagine like all those types of feelings would just be so much more amplified in Japanese culture, especially in the time period in which they came out.
Yeah, probably.
And you're kind of, it's not freedom of speech necessarily, but you definitely can do stuff on screen that you wouldn't be able to do in maybe something else. And so art is allowed to not maybe not be limitless, but definitely like you can express yourself more in a movie.
Right, I'm reminded of like Animal Farm or something like that.
Exactly.
Um, so the commentator, as far as the filmmaking was concerned, like direction, editing, cinematography,
Mm.
the commentator loved every aspect of this film 1,000,000%, except for one thing. The one thing they did not appreciate visually was the scene when they're on the hilltop and it's day for night and the soldiers are approaching and they start shooting their muskets at them, and especially this one scene when they're running and ducking alongside a log.
Oh, the awkward cuts.
Yes,
Yeah,
the commentator really didn't like that because he was explaining how it was shot was they would roll camera on them running and ducking,
yeah,
cut, they would shoot real bullets, or I don't know if I doubt they're shooting muskets. I mean, for the filming,
yeah.
they're shooting real projectiles, then bringing the actors back in, cutting the next section of them running, ducking, repeat, repeat, repeat. And he was just like, why did they have to use real firearms? Couldn't they have just used squibs and, just shot without all the cuts? That was the one major criticism.
And I agree with the criticism, and that goes to Kurosawa's somewhat perfectionist insanity, to the point of actually ruinous in that moment because the cuts are so obvious. But yeah, he would do that. Everything had to be precise, and everything had to be realistic in his point of view. I can't remember what movie I read this little tidbit. I can't remember what movie it was, but it was one of these samurai ones, and it was taking place in some sort of doctor's kind of a little medical hut, and we have this medical cabinet that's never opened. We never see what's inside of it. But he was harassing all the set designers that they had to make sure it was period accurate medicine in the medicine cabinet. Even though it's never filmed, he just fixated on it and harassed them until they did it right for him. So he's one of those types of personality filmmakers. And yeah, it totally breaks the illusion here because the edits are just so poorly done. And in that kind of environment too, with the grass constantly moving with the wind, you could never make it match up. It's yeah, just I think that's a mistake too.
One, I guess, obvious point, like fact, rule of three: the two peasants dig out stuff three times. They're digging three times throughout the film. First is in the grave. Well, at least one of them is. I guess the other is probably doing the same thing, but they're digging. What is it for gold in that castle
Yeah, and they're
in
slaves.
the beginning when they're enslaved or mistaken for slaves. What's the difference? When they get to the hidden fortress, which is again considerably smaller than I thought, I was like, when I think of a fortress, I think of, well, again, we kind of, I guess, like, use these terms loosely and whatnot, and you can like change them for each one, like they're palette swap almost. Like when I think of a fortress, I also think of like a castle. So I'm like, I thought the fortress was going to be bigger and more imposing, and it's just like a few buildings and a secret underground bunker.
Yeah, no,
So,
the title makes you think it's gonna be something more exciting, and in particular, Eric's kind of saying this was a direct comparison. I was expecting some sort of
I was gonna say something about that, or two things about that.
all right, hang on a second. Let me just finish my point. And then the third
sure.
time, the rule of three, they what is it? They dig out the gold from the fire after they pitch the entire cart full of wood gold into
Mm,
the fire during the festival, and they, even though the other characters are also like digging up the gold remains, I'm still counting that as like the third time they're digging up stuff. So Eric, you may proceed unless you have anything to comment about my stuff.
Yeah, two thoughts on the fortress. This is part of the reason why I think I have my memory streams crossed with some other samurai film, was because I remember, or the way I remembered it was that the princess was captured and was being held by the enemy, and they were in this fortress that was more in the traditional sense. It might have been made out of wood, and then like the hero like character, like the general, had to like rescue her from this hidden enemy fortress. I can see it in my mind. It's obviously not this movie, so that's why I think I must be mixing in another movie into this. Um, but then also, just thinking of fortresses that are not fortresses in the traditional sense, it, like the Alamo, which is not too far from where I am. Um, People generally know the story through Hollywood or whatever. But at the end of the day, the Alamo was just a small mission, which is essentially a small church, and that's all it really is. I mean, you can see it today. It's just a small stone church, but just I don't know. I was just thinking of fortresses that are thought of as fortresses, but are not, like, more in the metaphorical sense.
That's fair. I mean, but Caleb might know this one, but like Caleb, when I think of a fort, I think of, well, Fort Langley.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, but since we brought up Star Wars again, as you guys were talking, I started to remember another parallel to Star Wars that I forgot to mention early on, and that is at the end with the giving the gold scene slash the metal scene from A New Hope.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that was, and I was even thinking, I was like, these couple of schmucks, I don't know if they deserve that gold. They were coming on to you, really pushing the limit of, yeah, trying to assault her, basically. I was like, I don't know if they've earned that gold.
yeah. I brought that up during my comparisons.
Oh, okay, maybe I didn't hear that
No,
part.
it's okay.
But I also wanted to call the maybe you address this too. That with I forget what they call it, that thing that they would do with the women would shave off their eyebrows or pluck them, and then they would paint eyebrows further up their head.
Hmm.
Some of that was making me think of Phantom Menace, Princess Amidala,
Oh, without a doubt.
and I always find that creepy. I never like that look. That puts me off.
Yeah. I don't really like it in anime or like in stage like stuff that I see, but But I guess there's a
Yeah.
lot of weird visual things like that if you look through Japanese and Chinese history, like different aesthetic choices, like body modification, almost to say.
Yeah, and I think it had something to do with like women had to have very strict like shape of their hair, and so because they couldn't accentuate their hair in stylistic ways, they would just do weird face modification stuff. I think that's where that comes from. I
Yeah, and let's not forget that the men had all their different types of
Yeah,
modifications that they
that's
would
fair.
do as well. I mean, yes, definitely both ways.
Yeah, and I guess they had their strict hair things too, samurais especially. But
But yeah, I see tons of Amidala references between this princess and because she's more like this princess than Princess Leia is,
that's fair. Yep.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
and even with her guards looking like samurai, like her captain.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, maybe.
You don't think
Lu-
with their helmets and armor?
okay, loosely,
Yeah,
like
loosely.
very
Yeah,
like loosely adapted. Like they went another direction, which is totally fine, which is good because that way they don't like they're not plagiarizing.
Well, they're not. Yeah, they're not actual samurais or anything, but the royal guard, like in garb and helmet.
yeah. Maybe I'm putting that out of my mind. Maybe I can't remember it too well. I'm trying to block it out. But do we have anywhere else to go? I feel like there's one or two other bits I want to mention, but I have to go through my notes here.
I have several bits in case we still need
Sure.
to fill out time, but obviously
Yeah,
that's me.
take it away.
Let's go back to the what I initially was asking of like okay so it's called the Hidden Fortress, but it's like barely a set piece in this entire movie. It's only used briefly in the beginning, and that's it. And then I asked Eric like, hey, what's the literal translation in Japanese? And you're like, the three villains of the Hidden Fortress.
Hmm.
Who are those three villains?
Uh, well, we certainly know who two of them are, but I guess the general perhaps is considered one too. Although I'm not sure why he would be. That's interesting.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm like, because I was
Will he
really
be a villain to the I don't know the name of the other clan because they are the ones being hunted, and being sought after, and from their perspective. But I'm starting to think there's more of a metaphor here in the title, or that it has dual purpose, as being literal and metaphorical. Because I've still been thinking on the fact that the hidden fortress in the movie is not what one would think of as a hidden fortress. So I've been noodling on that since that was brought up. And now I'm starting to wonder, is the hidden fortress also a metaphor for an inner part of you or a person that is held sacred? That you can endure so much and be abused or battered, but you could have an inner fortress within you that is impenetrable. Because I'm starting to think that is an aspect of especially our hero characters. And then now I'm starting to think about the three villains of the Hidden Fortress after it was just raised again. And now I'm picturing that metaphorical inner sanctum you have, like within you, metaphorically, like your soul or being. And I'm starting to think of like if you had three evils or vices that dwelled inside your fortress. I feel like I need to look up a lot more because I'm not saying I'm right, but I definitely am starting to think there's a dual meaning here.
three evils potential or three villains. Excuse me, like
Yeah, or vices, or things that hold you back, whether it's um, um, um,
Greed,
yeah,
beauty.
greed, vanity. But I was also thinking of prejudice, preconceived notions.
Yeah, and I think the duty with the general. I mean, they mentioned that he had his own sister die for the princess, and yeah, in his way, the princess sees that side of him as outdated and wrong. That's part of her trying to push him to be more, I guess, modern in that way later in the movie. So maybe that has some tie-in.
Here's my read. The three villains. Let's see. Id, ego, and super ego. Just to peeve off a bunch of psychology students.
Oh no, there you go.
No. I mean that's germane to so many legendary writings. Or significant writings.
Probably not. But yeah, I would not have gone to the whole inner saint, like your inner fortress or anything like that within you. I wouldn't have never like gone to that. But
Yeah,
I do see the whole metaphor idea aspect. But I just, at least at this point, I cannot come into a read on what that title may be. It refers to something. Maybe it obviously means something in Japan, especially with the kanji. I wonder if like because it's kanji's often it's hard.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking the same thing, but on its surface level, I think it's clearly the read is it's the general and the peasants. I think that's the obvious notion. I just think there's more to it though if you
yeah,
dig deeper.
Because if the hidden fortress is the princess herself, the three evils that surround her. I don't know why this is the general, but we obviously know the two schmucks. Like that makes sense.
Oh, that could work if the princess is metaphorically the hidden fortress in of herself.
And well, she's perceived as like or she's told to go mute by the general. She doesn't like that. Maybe that's the villain. And again, villain doesn't necessarily mean like pure evil. I mean, maybe I'm thinking more of antagonist, but like no, like those two are greedy, and he's asking her to hide part of herself, but under the guise or under the reason to move through the land discreetly and deceptively to get to the to get back to their homeland.
yeah. And I did mean to mention, oh, maybe the three villains is just the three classes here. The villain is the class system. But that's just that off the top. But what I meant to say was, I like the fact that we have this ruler class, this princess, and she's forced to be mute through most of the movie. I think that there's something interesting about that in itself, dealing with these other two lower groups, just having to be the silent observer. I think that's cool.
Absolutely. And when they first presented when they were talking about the ruse of making her mute, I thought for sure that was setting up that she wasn't going to be able to do it. I was expecting her to falter early on and like break her silence. I was completely surprised that that did not happen at all. I was surprised how long she held it up. I couldn't remember while I was watching the movie if the peasants had seen her speak beforehand or not, but I guess they hadn't. Um, and and then what's even more incredible, or adding to it, is that while she is mute, she still finds ways to affect her influence on situations and other characters while still maintaining the rule of being mute.
Yeah, like when they try to steal the horses and go across the border on their own.
Loved it.
Yeah, I love that bit too. But I also like that she couldn't stand up and tell them not to do all that. She just had to kind of just follow them. They keep looking. They're like, oh, like go away, and they're doing their little like charades to try to tell her they're just taking the horses to be watered. I thought the comedy there
That
worked.
was that was such a good bit. Like that was a good display of her as well, where she was being, hey, Caleb, neutral Jin. She was waiting and listening.
Oh, there you go.
Waiting
Yeah,
and seeing. Exactly. All right. She was definitely playing it out and letting them act out. That's a funny thing. Like being the quietest person in the room enabled both characters to reveal their true selves, even though it was kind of obvious from the start. But even
yeah,
still, it's like by being passive, you all of a sudden reveal a true person. It's like Borat almost.
yeah. And again, yeah, occasionally these guys annoy me, but I do think they have some really strong moments. I like that a lot.
I
And that early sequence when we start off on them and then we see them fall into the slavery and their kind of joy of being reunited. I think that's all great. But then even then they still have these just constant sniping at one another. And they have that one fight where it escalates so much that the other one almost kills him with his little his digging tool. It's like, oh man, these guys are just a little piece of chaos on their own.
Yeah, one thing that maybe another joke that maybe not lands as funny, but I did enjoy was the fact that they were the general in disguise, obviously beforehand. Like when they first got to the hidden fortress, he tells them to go up the rock face, and they're going up there. They're struggling. They're bringing the whole mountain down or whatnot. And they get up there, they look down. It's like, what the heck is that? It's the hidden fortress. Roll credits, and then they see the general, and he goes through this into this house and through this door, or well, at least a piece of linen or cloth, is there like a cave, and then he comes they go through the cave system and end up down where they started climbing the mountain. I think that was kind of a funny bit. Maybe not as like laugh out loud, but
Oh
I
yeah.
like the little sequence there where it was the punchline. I think was delivered well.
Yeah, and you know what that reminded me of? I don't know if you remember this, or if you thought of this, I should say. It reminded me of the episode of Avatar that we just covered, the Firebending Masters, where we see Zuko and Aang struggling to climb up that mountain. And when they get to the top, they just look down, and everyone's just there. It's like they all took a secret passage. It was like the
I
same thing.
did not have that on my mind. I was not thinking that because, well, here's the thing. Okay, here's the difference. Because when they did that sequence, when they did that scene, it wasn't played for comedy. I think it was a little bit more
No,
subtle there,
no.
where and they did it over the time. This actually had shots that lingered on for a little too long. Like when I first watched it, I was like, I think this is going a little long. And then when I watched it again, obviously, while we're talking, it went quick for me. I was like, oh wow, okay. And you just see the comedy in it. Whereas with Zuko and Aang ascending the mountain, they're going up there like again they have this holy light basically, and they have to get it to the top, so it's almost like a quest. They have to get up there just to attain enlightenment almost in a way, whereas this is just two morons trying to get up the side of a mountain because this guy told them to.
Yeah, and I was feeling bad for the actors because when they go down that later, they're like rolling all over those rocks. I was like, oh my gosh,
Oh
that looks really
man,
painful.
I I know exactly what kind of rocks those are, and I don't just mean like geologically speaking. I just mean like I know how those rocks would feel if you like put your leg on them. Instant cuts, like instant like blood is being spilt, like everywhere. Like dang, dude, not cool. But yeah, props to those actors. I mean, again, probably a lot of more lax back in the day. You want to talk about like stuff that actors had to do back then? Like man, like and not have insurance or any compensations. Man, I tell you what, this was there'd be a lot of like OSHA violations. Or just whatever violations here. Like they were breaking the rules back then. We're not even talking about that, like comics or not comics, but those film codes, but just like humanitarian rules. Like good grief.
Yeah, and Kurosawa is another type of person who would make you do take after take until he felt it was just captured perfectly. So hopefully he didn't make them go down that mountain a bunch of times, but he's that kind of guy.
So I got, I guess, going up, bouncing off that. Do you wanna? You have any other your notes there, Caleb?
My notes are they're essentially done. Yeah, if you got more, you can take it
Okay,
away.
because here's another thing when it comes to take after take. Let us refer to the duel because even though we've kind of mentioned it, let's talk about the duel. Eric, would you like to start off with the duel?
Okay, just a take on the duel.
Yep. Like anything noteworthy? Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Did you think it was cut trash? Like, was it cut too much and you couldn't see what was happening? Like any basic action was
No, no,
happening?
no, 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 no. I got you. So I thought it was interesting in the commentary that it was noted that Kurosawa had a bit of Kempo experience in his youth, so um, so he had some more understanding of these types of duels beyond the layperson. And again, I don't know much about at this time about the actor who played the good general, but whether I I don't know. I want to say he had some type of training too, more so than Kurosawa. But whether it was from his own training or just being in movies, he was exceptionally up to the task of performing what he had to perform. Um, I thought it was going to be a little bit boring and drawn out. While it was drawn out, I did not find it boring though in execution. And I really liked watching it. The You see this in a lot of like Bruce Lee movies, but I think it was done and other movies outside of Bruce Lee. But the way the onlookers made the circle and the way they would contract and expand during certain moments and the way the camera was positioned and the way it was framed, absolutely excellent, perfect, like amazing. Um, um, what do you call it? Background character acting. Um, there was one particular moment of note that the commentary pointed out, which was the moment when the good general steps in, um, steps on the other general's staff, breaks it, and then retreats. Um, and like watch it, like it's one take, and it's all one shot, one take, no cutting, and it is perfect. It is like so on point. Now maybe it was the 12th take, I don't know, but the version we see in the film is just, it's just absolutely on point. um no, the duel, everything about it was fantastic to me.
Caleb, what are your thoughts on the duel that takes place in this film?
Oh, I really like it, and I like the fact that it isn't like a really passionate kind of fight. It's just kind of a, oh yeah, let's have a spar, and if I win, then I can go about my way. I think that lends a more lighter air to it. And even the end when he's saying goodbye and that big bright smile, I was like, oh wow, this is. I was not expecting this kind of character turn from him. I thought he would just, even though this was his friend, I figured he would just cut him down. So I like the surprise there. How about you, Isaac?
So my take on this, I will not, I don't want to get into all the technical stuff. I know some stuff when it comes to HEMA, and I've never done it myself personally, but I'm starting to get like more fascinated into it. But I can take what I know and apply it into that kind of stuff when it comes to arms training and stuff like that. Um, like I said before, I thought it was a little out of nowhere that he just ends up in this like small encampment. See, this is an encampment. This is not a fortress. Anyway, he just happens to, maybe that's a coincidence of the film. Maybe like that's a whole thing was Eric described as like spiritualism. Like he's, the Force. He was able to like find this old compatriot of his. And then they had this sparring match. So I like what Caleb called it. It's sparring match. It doesn't feel like it's this passionate match. I first off, when they said duel, because I knew about like there was a duel in this movie, I thought it was going to be with swords, but it wasn't. It was with poles, and or pole arms, excuse me, spears, and I was very surprised by that. And I hadn't exactly ever seen a major motion picture, at least to my knowledge, that uses spears in this style at least, and this actually looks very like how a real spear or pole arm contest would go about. It'd probably get a little bit more bloody, but I was very impressed with it. And in fact, again, like we have both combatants that have a similar like reaching weapon, so that it instantly negates any like reach they have on that. And the whole reason he breaks the spear at the end, I think this is obvious for everybody, but the reason he breaks the other general's spear is because now he has the longer stick. No pun intended, or no innuendos there. Just that now he literally has a shorter reaching weapon, so he would.
Yeah, it's game over.
I guess
Checkmate.
He's exactly.
Yeah.
Even though one of his troops could have, tossed him another spear, but I think that would have been dishonorable and
would have ruined the spirit of the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you do see a lot of spear and staffs fighting, like in kung fu movies, a lot.
I guess you do, yeah.
Yeah, you do, and even like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But the big difference is, or the way I differentiate them, is that comparing this to that would be like comparing the lightsaber dueling in the original trilogy versus like Revenge of the Sith. Whereas in kung fu movies, it's much more like a choreographed dance between characters, whereas this feels, by comparison, more grounded in reality.
Yeah.
This is definitely more plausible and grounded, which you're absolutely right. And the other one is spectacle. Like all those kung fu movies are designed to make it look beautiful and like instantly recognizable and be like, I want to do that. That's the whole selling point of this stuff. This felt the same way. It felt practical. It felt like they knew what they were doing. And there could have been more moves to it, but I was just impressed. I was like, holy smokes, like this is the 60s, and we actually have like a legit arms fight scene that could be deemed like fairly realistic and plausible. So I got to give my hat to Kurosawa on that. That is pretty awesome. That, I mean, it just he seems like the guy who would portray a fight scene like this in a more grounded way. The movie even feels like that as well. I was actually surprised that even though they had muskets around here, I was still surprised they didn't have any bows. But maybe that's just because it's a different era. Because I was thinking that they could have like stopped these guys with bows and arrows if they still had them. But I guess the same with guns, anyways. Where to?
Yeah, that's
Where
true.
to now? Anybody else?
No, but I was thinking about just him getting caught up because someone mentioned like him not expecting to find that little enemy fort uh, or outpost there. Um, Again, I feel like it's the Death Star moment if there is one in the movie. Um, Much like when Obi-Wan, Han, and Luke unexpectedly come across the Death Star and get tractor beamed in. But also, I am thinking of the scene when Han Solo runs down the corridor and then he gets into the hangar that has all the stormtroopers. Of course, there wasn't that many stormtroopers in the original New Hope, but it's still, even before the special editions, that to me was one of the most comical scenes of A New Hope when I was a kid, and so I was kind of just thinking about that with him stumbling across the enemy like that.
Yeah, and I think a movie like this, they don't have any like huge major action scenes, so finding a reason to insert this in there, I think it played well, and it's a really long and kind of standout moment. It definitely sat with me the next day when I was thinking about it, just how cool that scene was. And yeah, you mentioned that we occasionally do see this staff fighting in kung fu stuff. I don't feel like it's given such a spotlight the same way they do here. Usually it's just like, oh, there's someone sword fighting and then someone has a staff, and maybe they'll get a little variant in the fight where they're using both staffs, but yeah, not something that from the outset is just a staff fight. So I think that makes it stand out a little bit more.
I mean, another thing that the scene served was a setup for obviously the other general betraying his army and working with the princess and the general. So that was a setup there, which paid off really well. I was not expecting that, but I guess that also has to also do with it was both parts. It was both um, anger towards the general for dishonoring him basically and not committing seppuku or just killing him there in the sparring match, and then of course the princess wooing him over, or at least changing his attitude with that song when she's imprisoned.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I loved it because I fully expected there to be a second bigger duel to the death, um, and I did
Hmm.
not see it going down the way it did, which thrilled me.
I've been watching too many Street Fighter movies
Yeah, that's fair.
and how bleak those can be.
Yeah, and I think her performance of this song was quite well done too, and clearly done like right there, which I much prefer. I wish movies would get back to doing that kind of thing instead of. I feel like usually they just pre-record it and just like insert it in or record it after the
Oh,
fact.
you think it was recorded in real time?
It certainly sounded like it. Yeah, it sounded
I'll
natural.
need to go back and look because I just assume, especially with foreign films, especially of older times, I just assume that everything is recorded silent, um, and ADR'd afterward. But I don't know. I have no idea.
I was wondering about that too, whether or not this film was 80 yard instead of just because they're outside. So I don't know how they're gonna have like boom mics and being able to pick up the audio.
No, I think the standard with Japan was to record audio while filming.
I
But yeah, plenty of places weren't doing that. And I don't. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure with Japan they were. Yeah,
Um,
on site.
I thought about this because I made a post about this not within the last 24 hours, but one of the greatest special features, in my opinion, especially of a Tarantino film, is if I don't know how familiar you guys are with the movie Death Proof, but there's the one scene where Mary Elizabeth Winstead sings while she's listening to her iPod, and it's cut off when Kurt Russell comes around and like wet willies her foot. Um, but in the special features for the movie, um, that whole idea of her singing in that moment was relatively spur of the moment during filming. And Tarantino was like, "Do you think you could do this like in camera?" And she just like practiced for a little bit and was like, "Yeah, I think I got this." And in the special features, you can see the full, uncut her singing that entire song live in camera, and it is absolutely fantastic.
Huh,
It is amazing. So yeah, I just recommend that
that's
to anybody.
interesting.
It's really, really good.
Hmm.
I wish there was more of it in the actual movie, but whatever.
But I feel like I've come to the end of my notes here. So if you guys have anything else before we move to final thoughts.
Quite convenient, given that for my viewing of the movie, it just finished in the background.
Oh, there you go.
My gosh, mine's finished multiple times, but it's all good.
Of course, is it really, or is it just did it go through once, or have you? Is this like your second time?
I played through once, and then I put it like halfway, and then it played through again, and yeah.
All right, you just keep re-recording. Okay, so I guess since we've just finished, or we're about to finish, I guess the ending for me. Here's one thing where I'm just like, okay, hang on a second. So they get the princess after like the daring rescue, literally like almost like a Death Star rescue in a way of the other general coming in, the Scar general. Excuse me, I'll make it clear there. The Scar general got abused by his lord. Good grief.
Hmm.
Yeah, yikes. That happened. Actually, some of that happened also quickly. I know that a few days had passed, so that is nice. So maybe that there is just like some benefit of the doubt where you just have to what is it? Just lower your expectations and suspend your disbelief. There we go. To think, oh yeah, it's been a few days, so he probably went back to his lord and reported what happened, or somebody did, and then the lord punished him by putting a scar on his face. Just at the end when they get the gold back, or when the princess and two generals make it to, and obviously the peasant girl, when they make it to their other land, or their homeland basically, or their home territory. Events almost happen pretty quickly where we see the end of where the peasants are. Those other soldiers show up. It's like, hey, are you here for these guys? And they have the gold with the horses, and then they're presented to the princess. And I'm like, wow, everything happened a little so fast. Like it was Kurosawa was like trying to wrap the story up pretty quickly and wrap it all up in a nice little neatly tied bow. Am I wrong on that, or am I just like, is that my first impression?
I think it was quick, but I think it was also by design, because just me as an audience member watching it, once they escape through I don't know what those are called, those Japanese like gateways.
Mm-hmm.
But once they escape on horseback, as me as an audience member, I feel like, oh, phew, good, we did it. Like, end of climax. We just need to wrap some things up. But again, I was like, are we going to go back to the original two peasants? And so I feel because that moment has already happened and you're already starting to come off the high, then it is by design to be expedient from that point on to wrap things up.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost feels like a bookend at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it works well enough. I don't know if I guess I guess I can understand why they want to go back to them for the end bit, but by that point I was kind of like, okay, I'm more with the main cast. I don't really care that much about these two. So bookending it with them.
Thank you for setting me up for what I wanted to say.
Sure.
More on this part. So this wasn't, my idea was spurred upon by the commentary once again. And after they received first of all, we see, when they go before the two generals and the princess, when they're seated, we now see those characters in their true form, so to speak, even if it is like a new form for the converted general. And in one sense, I'm sorry, I could go on days with oblique Star Wars references, even if they're just feel-alikes. But it's almost like seeing the Force Ghosts at the end of Return of the Jedi, and kind of seeing those characters as them true selves. But beyond that, we see them now in all their glory. And so when the peasants leave after receiving their reward, the commentator mentioned how, we started off with these characters, there are point of view characters, and as they descend down the staircase, the commentator said that they are now leaving the world of gods and returning back to their normal lives. And I really like that. That really stuck with me. And then it made me think now, during this commentary, that if I think of these characters as being in the world of gods, is it so much that, or now it makes me think of the whole movie as like in Greek mythology, when the gods would sometimes disguise themselves as humans and live amongst and get in get into shenanigans amongst humans before they return back to
Mm.
Olympus or whatever. And so I kind of
Mm-hmm.
saw this as being like a mythic story of these godlike characters assuming like the clothing and lifestyle of lowly humans before in the end returning back to their mountaintop. And I just think that's an amazing way to look at this whole story and to frame it.
Isaac?
Would have never thought of that. I like that read on the film. I just thought though of like I don't know why I thought of this, but I was like, well, what if the title again, not to go back
I
to this,
love it. I
this
love
relates
it.
to it though. What if the title, the three villains of the Hidden Fortress, what if that refers to the it could be anything, but like it refers to the point of view of the two peasants, and then the three people at the end are the villains.
Well, yes, and if we want to get poetic about it, I can expound upon that because another metaphor for the hidden fortress is like an an elusive inner peace or elusive paradise or way of living. So if the goal is for these characters, I'm talking about the three I was talking about, the more aristocratic characters. If the goal is for them to return to quote unquote normalcy or paradise where you're without fear of living and everything in opposition, perhaps that's the hidden fortress. Because I'm almost thinking of it as like a take on the concept of the undiscovered country, except the country is something paradisical, like the Garden of Eden or something. You know, maybe that's the hidden fortress is like that inner place of peace that is difficult to find. And again, three villains. Maybe it's just a play on words or whatever, or just being ironic. Because it could be them as well. The three villains dwelling in the hidden fortress at the end. Again, the fortress being paradise.
Hmm. Yeah, it's all interesting. It's all interesting.
I always think when Caleb has this type of reaction to anything, that it's something I used to say at work because I used to be in a position like a concierge, and people would have requests, and I would always say, "Okay, I hear what you're asking for, and I'm just going to write it on this piece of paper, and I'm just going to throw it in the air and walk away." And so I always picture Caleb metaphorically writing it on a piece of paper, going, and then just tossing it and walking away.
Yeah, this is the too drunk to string words together.
Yep, I figured. He's drunk and he wants to end the podcast. So
No, keep going if you have more to say. Keep going.
It's just
no,
so funny.
I want you to engage with us on this, but obviously I don't think there's anything you have to say about that. You're just like, yeah, that's a good read.
It's interesting read. Interesting read is all I'll say.
No, you don't have to add to it, obviously.
Yeah,
but other than that, yeah.
I definitely think the original literal translation is a heck of a lot more interesting
Agreed.
than the English version.
I agree.
And just because I don't just do this with Kurosawa or the quote unquote great filmmakers, but I always think anybody who's really applied themselves to any form of art, you definitely don't just slap on a title and just be like, yeah, that it just says what it is on the tin. You're definitely going to have your own nuanced thoughts about it in your head. It just so it warrants exploration. Whether we're stumbling in the right place or not, it doesn't matter. It definitely warrants exploration.
Yeah, it becomes trickier because, especially around this time, most of the titling came from the studios. They would just the filmmakers would make their film. They might have an idea what to call it, but usually the studios are the ones to slap a name on.
Way to wreck a point.
I know.
Wow.
It's like saying, "Yeah, man, I just had this epiphany in life," and kid was like, "Yeah, that I saw it in a fortune cookie."
Yeah, it's an unfortunate.
How faker can you get? Great misfortune.
To base my entire life philosophy on something out of a fortune cookie.
Wow, when you make it sound like studios came up with it in an afternoon or something like that by a committee, I really sound stupid for pontificating on all this stuff.
Hey, I don't know in this case. He may have given the name. I don't
Have
know
you
in this
guys seen The
case.
Last Dragon? I feel like Leroy Brown. Have y'all seen that?
Oh, yes. Bruce Leroy. Bruce Leroy.
Yeah, for those unfamiliar,
That is so coincidental.
his character is told by his elder mentor figure to seek out like the chosen one who has like all the wisdom, and then he goes to
Yes.
like the egg fong fortune cookie factory or whatever, and then he discovers that it's just like a computer and a machine that just prints out these.
Yeah.
Now I feel like Leroy Brown. Like Caleb's just
Yeah,
destroyed.
Bruce Leroy.
Yeah, Bruce Leroy Brown. Caleb's just destroyed my whole world.
And I always think, because occasionally this would happen and filmmakers would be heartbroken about the name that the studio chose. And I always think of George Romero with Season of the Witch, where in almost any interview that you watch, he'll always refer to it as Jack's wife. He was like, the studio slapped this name on it, Season of the Witch, a cheap name just to sell tickets, but it's Jack's wife. And all the actors would do the same. They'd all call it that. And I always thought that was sad for them that they just took it away from them.
But even if this was a studio generated title, the title is obviously drawing from what is explicit in the movie.
Yeah.
So it still comes from the DNA of the movie. So even if it's an explicit title made by someone else, we should still be able to extrapolate elements that are still in the movie. So even if we're extrapolating from the Hollywood or studio title, it's still based in the truth of the movie itself. So these themes are still to some degree apparent in the work itself.
Yeah, and of course, once the film's made, once it's out there, especially a film like this that's so old, yeah, what you interpret from it, I mean, that's completely fair. You know, whatever the intent of the filmmaker, it changes over the years in terms of the intent, or at least the readings of the audience. The filmmaker's intent doesn't necessarily matter in that regard.
Because title aside, the hidden fortress, quote unquote, it still very well could be the intended metaphor in one of these or multiple of these ways.
Yep. But well, do you guys have anywhere else to go before we start doing the curtain call?
Not particularly.
I think as of this moment, even though I'll be definitely watching this again, I guess I'll say I recommend this film to anybody. Do you think, Caleb, that this is an entry level film for any person to get into Kurosawa, or is there a better film that is for the beginners,
Better film for the beginners.
or like easier to understand, easier to like I guess digest, and or a good starter pack?
No, yeah, I think this would be a good starter pack. I don't think it's his best that I've seen so far. Certainly not, but it certainly features a lot of the strong aspects that he does throughout his career in his contemporary and samurai films. So the emphasis on the different class structures, the good balance of humor, and a lot of his usual performers feature in it as well. So you'll get a sense of his cast of actors. So
Man, every time you guys say something, all these synapses fire in my brain.
That's good.
I'm definitely not that learned on Kurosawa's work. I've maybe seen 5 or 6 of his films, and most of them have been quite some time ago. But just from the little I've experienced, I would think this would be a good intro, as well as Seven Samurai. But why this one? Aside from like what Caleb said, and despite it not necessarily representing his body of work, I think it can't be discounted. Like the connections to Star Wars, because I think that would help on a starter level, because most people would be familiar with Star Wars to some degree going in. So I think that helps with that. And then, since something else I was thinking about was, I forgot to mention that this reminded me of a random movie I watched several months ago on the Criterion Channel, which was Sullivan's Travels from 1941, which was a movie that was never aware of before, and I thoroughly enjoyed. And it's also like a comedy for the time. And in it, this man is very rich and wealthy, but he's like fed up with his handlers and publicists, etc., lawyers. So he goes off the grid to get away from them. And the movie, even though it came out in 41, it takes place during the Depression era. And so he lives a lifestyle amongst the masses in the United States in the middle of the country. And through the movie, like his eyes are completely opened to how everyday people live. Um, and in the beginning of the movie, there was all these arguments because I think he was an actor or director. I mean, in the movie, and he wanted to just make serious films, serious, like high-minded artistic films. And his representation was like, no, people don't want that. They just want to be entertained. And he's like, no, I have to like be true to my artistic vision. But when he goes through his travels and travails and all types of things, and spoiler if you don't mind for Sullivan's travels, but there's an iconic scene at the end, where I think he gets caught up in a chain gang, and it's kind of like Cool Hand Luke, where it's like oppressive, like old school, chain gang type situation. But the one bit of respite or entertainment they'll allow the prisoners to have is there's a local small church that'll host like a little movie night and for the inmates and whatnot. And so the guards take them to the little church house and they play a film, and it's like a silent Mickey Mouse cartoon in black and white. And like the inmates start to like laugh and some cry. And then that's when the character Sullivan has his epiphany that even though the world is so terrible right now and all this human suffering, these people find joy like in levity and just entertainment. And that's what changes his whole dynamic when he's like, yes, I am going to give the people what they want because that's what they want. I don't know why I'm getting emotional right now, because that's what they need and that's what gets them through like the hard times. And I don't know, I love that movie so much, and this movie just reminded me of that because of that undercover aspect. Oh my god, I'm all broken up now.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'd pass you tissue if you were in the same place. Well, I guess we are. We're in the bar. Never mind what I sing.
There you go. Yeah.
Wow. Powerful.
Yeah. No, glad you're. Thanks for expressing your emotions there. That was out of nowhere.
Well, involuntary, but yes.
Hey, sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it just happens.
Active passion, man. I got nothing against that. That was just spontaneous.
It was just really good. It was, God, that movie like really spoke to me.
Yeah, and unlike the princess, you didn't have to climb to a hidden part of the mountain, secluded, to let it free.
I like that moment. It came on my screen like 10 minutes ago, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Don't forget the Jedi mind trick in the movie.
Oh, right. Reverse psychology?
Yes, exactly.
Which I was even wondering, I was like, did that term exist at this time? I don't think it did.
I literally was thinking the same thing. I'm like, is this like anachronistic at all? Is this period accurate? Of course, what the hey?
Hey, you never know.
Yeah, but it's something I'm sure out of like the Art of War or something. I mean, some tactic similar.
Could be, yeah.
Of course. Yeah, and I was thinking that that's the thing I keep having of just like, okay, so all these explicit words, they are not actually what they say they are. In Japanese, obviously, there's Japanese and English are not the same.
Oh yeah, I mean, this and many other things, I would love to see like literal translations.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, I'm only able to notice it like in Spanish language media. That's where I can really pick up on. Okay, I see what you did there with English translation. Yeah, that means the same thing, but it's definitely not the same to know what they're literally saying.
I don't give it a pass, but it's only because Latin and English are closer together than Japanese and English. So that's my only caveat.
Sure, but just like the idioms and the way people say things, that's really what gets lost in translation.
That's true. I don't deny it. But when they said like what is it, a wood lumberjack or like coal maker, whatever it is, when they were trying to describe the general initially, when he was following them in the beginning, I was like, okay, what do they actually say? Like, what are they actually saying?
Yeah. When I used to work with immigrants, and even some people from Laredo, which is almost like being from a foreign country if you're from Laredo, Texas. But I would notice people would literally say to me in Spanish, like, "Oh, hair of the tongue," and I'd be like, "Pelo de la lengua." Like, what do you mean right now when you say hair of the tongue? Like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what are you talking about?
Sounds like a metaphor or a saying.
Yeah, and it's an idiom. And when you say someone like has the hair of the tongue, or it just means that you're speaking no filter. You're just saying the truth as it is.
Oh, I see.
Oh, interesting.
I thought like with hair of the tongue, it means like, oh, look at this like fool because he's trying to like
Oh,
pick at a
yeah.
hair that he got
I
stuck in
get
his
you.
tongue. Which I'm like, okay, I guess that makes sense.
When you're talking to somebody, you literally hear them say hair of the tongue, and I'm just like, what? What does that eat? What?
That also may be a cultural thing as well.
Yeah.
So I gotta.
No, definitely.
And they're like, no filter. Like, you just speak your mind. You don't sugarcoat. And I'm like, oh. Okay.
So AKA blunt. Got it.
Yeah. I was like, oh. But I'm just saying, yeah. So you notice those things if you have any ability, like in bilingualcy, when you look at other things.
Yeah, because there's definitely a lot of coarse language in this in terms of the English translation. So I just wonder, like, they're throwing around shithead a lot. Definitely the two guys call each other that.
That's funny. I barely noticed that. You're right, but I just completely glossed over it in my mind.
I noticed it.
Yeah, for the era, yeah, it stands out. But yeah, I guess starting with final thoughts, let's go over to how about you, Eric? What's your summations for this one?
Now, you can cut this out, but I was watching
Sure.
like a round table of quote unquote white guys. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Talking about Blue Beetle the other day on YouTube, and the one guy was because one guy was like, "Oh, I hate the family. Like the characters are so annoying, blah blah blah," and like they're so crude. He said pendejos, and I was just like, "Oh my god, why does that sound so crazy?" Like coming out of him in the context of this conversation, like, yeah, I don't know. It was. I'm not saying I was offended or anything. It was just like, whoa, that is just wild.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a bit much. Yeah. Sometimes it's nice to have a filter, not use the hair of the tongue.
Point to you, sir. I'm just gonna say those guys are racist anyway.
Well, you never know. But
I don't know what's in their heart.
Fair enough.
but Eric, final thoughts.
Okay. So, as everyone knows now, I had this different memory of this movie before today. And I always thought this was based on that false memory. I always thought it was a good movie, but if not for the Star Wars connection, I didn't necessarily think it a great movie or something that I was in any hurry to revisit. But after seeing the real movie now, oh my god, I really fell in love with the movie. Like, really did. And I'm familiar with some other samurai films for sure, not necessarily Kurosawa. And I just loved how this was in the genre, but then so different. It was like really different. Like, it doesn't even, well, I guess you wouldn't even call it a samurai movie, maybe, because it's more those other elements. Like the comedy and and I was going to say that too. The other thing I thought of besides Sullivan's Travels was all this talk and focus on like the lower class in universe. Just once again reminded me of part of the reason I think Andor is so amazing, because Star Wars is an analog for like the samurai universe or just these types of movies in general. And I loved to finally see the less important people in the Star Wars universe for once and really focus on them. And even though they're the lower classes or the forgotten people, how much impact they can still have on many, many things. And that's what the peasants did in this movie as well. I incredibly love this movie. I have to be crass for at least a moment and just say, on top of everything I think that is great about the princess, on top of all that, she is flaming hot at the same time. And that does not hurt at all. I just love like almost every character. The peasants really annoyed me and really pushed it a bit for me, but I could look past that and it's fine in the grand scheme of things. But while actually watching, it was difficult at times. Um, I'll just mention, because I'm trying to get you guys a sponsorship with Rotten Tomatoes, but this film has 96% with the critics, 92% with the audiences.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I love this movie. I know you don't normally do ratings, but I'm giving it a really strong 4.5 out of 5, and it has now made it on my list of all-time favorite movies, which is currently at 120.
Nice. Isaac, do you want to go next or me?
No, I'll let you go next, my friend. Please. What did you? What are your final thoughts, Caleb, for the Hidden Fortress?
Oh, I thought it was a lot of fun. Yeah, again, I had to partway through watching, I had to put my expectations aside just because not just what Eric was saying, but knowing for so many years that a lot of people said that, oh, this was such a direct inspiration for Star Wars. So I'd spent the early half kind of looking for it, and then I just had to be like, okay, put that side to bed and just enjoy this as my next Kurosawa film. But I think all the characters are a lot of fun. I don't think that this is one of his like heavy hitters. I wasn't necessarily hugely emotionally moved, as I can occasionally find myself watching his films. But I had a lot of fun with the peasants when they were in their good comedy bits. Occasionally, like Eric mentioned, yeah, they can be a little bit annoying, and by the end, I felt like I'd had enough of them. But for the main cast, especially the princess, I thought that there was a lot there. And even though we don't get too much with that turn with what's his name again?
Tadakoro. Tadakoro. Excuse me.
Tadakoro. Yeah, even though his turn, they didn't give it that much time. For whatever reason, I just found that very impactful, and especially the scene. I love the way they framed it when she's singing that song, and we just see the back of him, and he's looking at her. And partway through the song, he looks away. Something about the way that they pulled that off, I felt was one of the more impactful shots in the movie.
Completely agree.
And so, yeah, definitely a strong movie. Yeah, all around, really enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing it again. I feel like maybe I'd get more out of it on a second viewing, especially without that Star Wars distraction kind of in the way up at the front side. But how about you, Isaac?
I have similar feelings with everybody else. I hated the film. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. No, this film's great. This film's amazing. It's well shot. It's well directed. Everything about it is great. I definitely love it, and I really strongly recommend people go out and watch this. And for no reason to watch it for the Star Wars connection, just watch it as its film. It's by the film itself, because I think it stands on its own. It literally is just because of North Americans, or really, I guess, just Americans and Canadians. I don't know about the Mexicans, connecting it to Star Wars. That's it. Hey, I gotta be careful when I say that. I get that, but I'm just saying.
Don't forget about the Brits. Don't forget about the Brits. I don't know.
They're not a part of North America. What are you talking about?
Hey, you got to throw them in there too.
I wonder how Mexicans, because I know Mexicans love manga, or at least the younger generation love manga and anime.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that'd be interesting.
See, the reason I say that, and I know it does sound like, just incredibly disrespectful to my Mexican brothers, sisters, those and other, genders. It does seem rude. It's just like, unfortunately, the country next to us is America, and Mexico often gets ignored in North America. Whenever everybody thinks North America, it's like, but do you guys include Mexico as well? Because they're...
It's okay. They don't even know what Canada is other than another option besides the United States. Other than that, they know nothing else.
I guess there is that, but hey, anyway, I don't really mind. That's fine. But I'm just saying, like, I want their take on this as well. They're a part of North America just as much as I am. Anyway, it doesn't matter. My point being is that I definitely recommend this film to everybody, and despite our this connection to Star Wars, it doesn't matter. Like, this film stands as like I wish that moniker and that stigma went away. It's not stigma, but you know what I mean. That comparison went away because loosely based, like there's some stuff here that is loosely connected to stuff, but not really. No, like Lucas is not a one-for-one remake. It never was. He just took the aspects that he liked out of the film, and obviously, or at least stood out to him, and he put them into his movie. So and that's the correct thing to do. Is that it's not a complete remake, but I definitely would have loved in another universe to have explored Lucas's Hidden Fortress, because that was the initial thing.
Oh.
Remember, he was initially he wanted to get the rights to remake the film over in America. So I definitely would have liked to see what that version would have looked like, and how he would have done it, and what period and era he would have set it in. If he would have done it in Japan, or if he would have done it somewhere else in the world, I would have been interested to see. I don't know if it would have been done well or not, but hey, it's just something that we may never know.
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah, I guess speaking of Lucas, I'm very excited to get into the next section of this little mini retrospective, which is THX 1138. Oh boy, it's been a few years since I've seen it, but I think this will be my fourth viewing. So I've definitely got some pre-baked thoughts coming in.
If I may, I had two final thoughts. I post final thoughts. Sorry.
Post thoughts
Sure.
go.
One I meant to say during the core conversation. The other, again, the synapses fired when I was listening to Isaac.
I do that a lot, don't I?
The one I meant to mention earlier was, and I've said this before, maybe not around you guys, maybe around you guys, but I've thought this since the first time I saw samurai movies of like the 50s and early 60s, that I was always struck by the look of them in general, like the cinematography and film quality.
Hmm.
And it's similar to how I was struck the first time I jumped into French New Wave. And I always wonder why, like, these movies of this era look so authentic, oftentimes more so than Hollywood movies at the same time period. But also, I lament that when you start to watch Japanese film as they progress into the 70s and then the 80s and beyond, they just lose this type of look. I'm speaking generally, of course. And I wonder, do you guys ever think about that? Do you notice that? Do you ever have feelings about it like I do? Like it's almost like a lost art in of itself.
No, yeah, I can. I mean, so many of them become much more flashy and a little bit over the top with the Japanese kind of. It becomes more exploitation. A
Yes.
lot of their samurai flicks, and yeah, some of the artistry gets shed for extreme violence. Is what a lot of it becomes.
It's almost like pre-anime in a way, where the theatricality is still there, but like, and I'm just thinking of like Street Fighter and how like animated and nonsensical and exploitative that can get.
Yes. Yes.
But, so yeah, and it feels really dirty in comparison to this, where there's a lot of dirt in this film, but it looks cool. Like the shots of it are really like spectacular and pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of like how crystal clear and and modern like something like Doctor Strangelove looks.
Mm.
It's like, how does this pop so much like this black and white movie from the mid 60s and look so modern at the same time? And I get that feeling when I watch a lot of samurai movies from this time period, production wise. And then the thought I thought of listening to Isaac, while I certainly agree, obviously, seeing it anew, like this is certainly not shot for shot with A New Hope and Star Wars, but I still think there are so many enough connections and nods, loose nods, in Star Wars to this that I would kind of put it in the same place I put the comparison that people use ridiculously, which is comparing something like Avatar to Dances with Wolves, because somehow that makes it terrible, or just a a copy, unoriginal or whatever, because the way I see that comparison is like how I see this comparison with Star Wars, which is I see plenty of connections, but there's still their own separate things that exist very separately and have their own artistic integrity, even if I still at the same time see tons and tons of connections.
Or I guess for us, or for at least Caleb and I's sake, there's Aliens, and then there's Leviathan. Leviathan clearly stole everything from Aliens. This just borrows or Star Wars 77 borrows ideas that were in this film, loosely, but does them differently.
Yeah, and one day, Isaac, I'll make you watch Carnosaur 2. And that's the real carbon copy. Every plot point, every character. It
Right.
is the same film, just with little shitty dinosaur puppets running around. It's crazy.
I forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot about that.
I recommend Carnosaur 2. Everyone go see it.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
But take us home, Isaac. Take us home.
Well, first I gotta ask Caleb
Oh.
for THX 1138B. Are we reviewing both the theatrical version and the student film?
Now, why you throwing in the B there? Is that part of the title? I thought it was just THX 1138.
I'm pretty sure it was, right? Or am I just like high on drugs? Eric, guy in the chair, please.
No. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just 1138.
That was 1138B, but maybe I'm just incorrect in that.
Maybe the short film. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I think that's what he was saying. I think he was implying it was the short film title. Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
So we need a ruling here. Sorry.
I typed in the wrong thing. Let me type in
Nope.
the correct thing. And make
Oh,
it count.
the title of the short film was Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1148 4EB.
Ah, thank you very much, sir. Okay, well, anyway, I assume that'll probably come up in the discussion. Unless it's...
Sure. If we can track it down, I know you've got it on that fucking Blu-ray.
Which I will be giving
But-
back to you shortly, still.
I'm just playing this, by the way. I actually don't care. I've had it recorded for a long time now on TCM. It's just been sitting there waiting.
Even still, you would... physical media trumps online streaming media.
Yeah.
I've had my copy for a long time now, still unopened, because I was saving it to watch it with my cousin, but I don't think he's ever gonna come. So
Oh, and the short film's on YouTube. So yeah, we can watch it. 15 minutes.
We're fine. We're definitely fine. Well, I guess to end this off, ladies and gentlemen, those between the affiliated, thank you for listening to us ramble on about this film again. Hopefully you were pleasantly entertained and it was intellectually stimulating. Eric, as always, thank you, sir. Hopefully, we also fired those synapses of yours and you feel like you can go out tomorrow and be like, I'm going to play 3 rounds or do 3 Sudoku puzzles in one day.
There you go. There you go.
And thank you, Caleb, for your time and whatnot. And till next time, everybody. Next time you see a hidden fortress with a bunch of sticks of with gold inside of them, are you gonna turn them over to the authorities, or are you just gonna squat there? Because I got the zoning laws around that area. Maybe hey, whereas this wasn't in the city zoning law plans. What gives and whatnot. Anyways, till next time. Peace.
Oh, I'm getting drunk now.
Lovely.
That long break, I had a couple glasses in between.
Of course, that
well, I'm
happened.
totally sober. I'm just getting drunk on this movie.